meeting on GrassRoots. Sorry for the little delay. This is our first hybrid meeting, being back in person. So we're working out the kinks. Thanks for being there with us. Cindy, would you read the roll to kick us off?
Skippy.
Present.
Rick.
Here.
Rachel.
Here.
Carson.
Here.
David.
Here.
John?
Present.
Kelly?
Yes, remotely.
And Francie is absent today.
Correct.
Well, we are officially in the future, both digital and in person. So we're going to open the meeting as we do with public comment for things not on the agenda. It's 3 minutes for anyone who likes to speak directly to the board. And I am happy to invite up Mr. Michael Saylor coming in from Glenwood by way of Aspen.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And I'm here today not as a commentary, more of a request for direction and information. I have a single-family home down at W/J. It's a category RO, and it's beyond its useful life, in my opinion, could use some repairs. And I was looking at the opportunity and saying, how could I benefit the community as well as get a new home? And what I wanted to do is request and see how I'd be able to redevelop my existing home into 2 single-family homes at no cost to the public, and being able to really add a new single-family home to the short supply of inventory that's out there today. And I'm really looking for guidance on how I could be able to do that. I've previously spoken to county planners. They weren't opposed to the idea. They referred me to APCHA and said, they're the ones that are going to have to help support this opportunity. And really what I'd like to find out is, what would the steps be to work with APCHA? And before I go back to the county planners and work with this board at W/J. So I don't know, is there some sort of guideline, or how would the board like to direct me on affecting the possibility of creating an additional single-family home to the inventory at no cost to the public?
I'll turn this one over to staff, but just one question to
really
clarify.
Just looking for
Just to clarify, Michael, if you were to develop this home in your mind, would that also carry the RO deed restriction? And do you intend to sell it, rent it, otherwise, or have you not thought about those things yet?
Well, I'm really looking for guidance how to make that work.
Okay.
I believe they would carry, I don't know the answer to any of those questions. I would believe, just from a financial standpoint, it would be sold to somebody else. I don't know that I'd be allowed to keep it and rent it, and I don't know if the bank would allow, that based on my own economics anyway. So I'm really at the beginning stages of how could I do this and what would it look like? So it's really more of a direction and exploration.
Oh, yeah, Rachel.
Well,
Michael, this is Rachel Richards, and I am not sure of this, but I think a lot of it really is going to lie with your HOA and the original zoning of your lot. But unless your lot is zoned for 2 single-family homes or a duplex, it's going to require rezoning, and that's going to require the support of your neighbors and your HOA. And I am really not sure on the sewer and water situation there, whether they're on septic or what their water system is.
They're part of a metro district.
They're part of a metro district, so they would probably have capacity, but I think that the HOA is going to look at the precedent and whether all the other existing lots could be or should be made into duplex or multiple units on a single lot. So those are really planning and zoning questions from the county as opposed to APCHA questions per se, in terms of whether it could be allowed and could be done. I think if you were talking about just replacing your existing RO home, that would really fall within APCHA, and again, within whatever side yard setbacks and FAR and zoning is allowed on that lot.
And it would be something that you would start with I don't know if you would want to actually start with a planner, not a county planner, but somebody who is actually in that business that can help you out. It would, again, you would have to get, I agree, you'd have to get your HOA approval, you would have to get probably rezoned, because I don't know if, you'd have to do a PUD amendment as well. I think it would be something that APCHA would support, as long as you want to keep some type of a deed restriction on both properties. Like, even if it's an RO, I think it would be something that we would still support. And I think maybe that might be what community development is looking for, is that we would support you doing that, as long as, but I agree, the neighbors are aware that you're trying to do it, and you have to go through the whole process with the community development department. But we would be referred on that, and then we would look to see what you're doing, and we would give recommendations on that.
Well, it's an interesting concept. If your lots are big enough to support 2 homes versus 1, like a duplex, is that a place to open up the potential for double the housing in W/A, right?
Right, right.
But that, you do it for all, I mean, as the HOA and the Metro District, for those units, or those properties, you want it for everybody, that open it up for everybody.
Well, and some of the properties already have duplexes on them, so they're kind of limited. Everything on Stevens Street are Category 4, single-family homes. So this has to do with Bullwinkle, McLean Flats, things like that. Because I know when you're coming down off of McLean Flats Road, Michael's house is the house on the left, when you're just before you get to Stevens Street. So I know, so he has a little bit of land to work with there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and just the background on that, just to give you a little more information, this lot was originally a duplex lot, and I don't believe there are any others like this on the W/J, and this was converted at the transition to a single-family home, and really what I'm looking to do is seeing if I can turn it back into lots 8 and 9. I think it's a very unique situation, and that's why I'm bringing it up. I don't know that many of the other lots could support that, or that anybody would even want to go through the brain damage and the expense and what I'm willing to do to jump through all the hoops to do this. But my belief is that at the end of the day, if I can, if it's mutually beneficial for everybody and it doesn't hurt the community that I'm living in, and it works within the community guidelines, and that's what the county planners had originally said to me, that if APCHA is supportive and your HOA is supportive, then we would have no objection to it. So, this is the next natural step to see if I'd be able to work with APCHA to make this come to fruition. And obviously, it's now in the public world. I'm sure I'll be talking to the members of my board out there at W/J next to see where they would go. Soft commentary was, we don't see why we wouldn't support it. It's not going to cost us any money.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think you've got some good next steps there. I do see Tom's hand up. So Tom, do you want to add anything for Michael before we send him back to his board?
Yeah, just briefly, APCHA, generally speaking, doesn't decide where affordable housing is going to occur, and I'm frankly surprised that community development would refer it to APCHA, because it's more of a, as has been said, it's a zoning decision, and it's a question of whether the covenants will allow it. So, from that standpoint, I don't see a real role for APCHA in the determination of whether Michael can do it or not.
Thanks, Tom. Kelly?
Yeah, Michael, thanks for your generosity of spirit and intent. And I would just say, as the go-between here between the county and APCHA, just feel free to reach out to me if you hit any stumbling blocks, and I can help you navigate.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I'll reach out to you probably next week and talk a little further, and look forward to the commentary.
That's right. Thanks, Michael. Have a...
Chair, sorry, so as Cindy pointed out, it's likely to be then a referral, right? So the county goes through planning, and then they send it to us for a more formal comment. And I definitely appreciate what Tom said. But I think one of that we'll wanna look at things like making sure they're both going to be deed restricted properties. Do we have the most updated deed restrictions, those types of things
Yep.
on them, so,
Right.
thanks.
Yep,
Yeah.
we'll want to get the most out of whatever
And-
resources
and-
created, Michael.
And the other thing I was thinking about is, it's gonna be important. I don't know that there's minimum living standards or sizes of rooms or amenities in an RO unit versus a category 4 or 5. But as he's designing his plans, I'd wanna make sure that it's, in conformity with what category you'd be able to give it at that time.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, Michael, got some marching orders.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.
So I'll leave you all now and to your meeting. So thank you.
All right,
Thanks, Michael.
So I'll just ask for internet land, if there's anyone else who wants to give public comment, please state your name for the record and speak. I can confirm there is no other public comment in the room. And I'll give it, we still have the 45-second delay, so I'll give it just a minute. And I don't see anyone in the line.
We'll keep working on it.
Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment section. And we will turn it over to Staff and Executive Director for any comments today.
It's wonderful to actually meet you all in person and see your full faces, so it's been a delight. First and foremost, thank you for allowing hybrid meetings. I know for staff, it worked out really well today. We've got Bethany and Tom remote today. As we discussed, Bethany, Cindy, Tom, and I met today, and one of the things we discussed was if there's a time where the board wants us to be in person or there's a specific reason to, we can always make that happen. But that flexibility is particularly helpful for everything from travel time to family stuff. So thank you. Next up on the list was tomorrow. We will be issuing, the city and county will issue a joint press release announcing our new APCHA executive director. The candidate has accepted, and we're all really excited. So that'll be announced tomorrow to everyone. And then lastly, I do want to thank Cindy for signing us up for the Saturday market. The city put out a invitation to any department who wanted to do it that day. Cindy signed us up, and was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
26th.
Yeah, and I, I was a little doubtful. I didn't like, let's be clear, I did not know how it was going to go. It was amazing. Not only did we get to see lots of friendly faces, I don't know, maybe from 8 to 2, and Bethany, Cindy, and I were all there. We probably answered somewhere between 30 and 50 questions. Cindy had printed out the rental guide as well as the buyer's guide, which is they're online as well. But people were very interested in that. Lots of locals, seasonal people who were looking for housing. It was stunning, and we will look to do it again. Our Cindy and my stipulation is we do not want to have to set up the Easy Up again, because I think the sandbags were about 30 pounds each, and so yeah, that was a lot of hauling. But it was a wonderful experience, and kudos to Cindy for signing us up. That's all for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or feedback or anything?
No, I think that's a great idea. That's another one of those educational outreach things that's free, and we can do. It takes time, but I'd volunteer to stand there and answer questions.
Can we do that every week or only?
Oh, God. It's not available to us every week, but I did talk a little bit with Sarah Ott about whether we do some kind of split booths, and I think we talked a little bit that we think we'd probably rotate maybe 3-hour shifts or something. I mean, it's a long
day.
time.
Yeah.
And it's a long time to be right across from one of those bakery ones that are 5 things. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was painful.
Kelly?
Very good.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. I didn't realize that was going on. I love tabling. I'd be happy to volunteer any future Saturdays.
Oh, thanks.
And I'll tell you, I was surprised because people would ask me a question and I could just turn and say, Cindy can answer that one.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
That's what I would
Yeah,
do,
that is actually part of the trick, is that
Cindy has to be there.
Yeah, Cindy has to be there. I will say also, we did get a member of the public who is very interested in the, former core staffer who was interested in helping out on, the deed restriction updates, and, yeah, so, fabulous
good.
day.
Very good.
That's awesome. I heard it over here too, but I'd also be happy to show up for a time so you could get some rotating board members.
Yeah, that'd probably be fun too, is right, even though you might not, it just that being present was terrific, and not one tomato.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think
Good.
the mashup in the future is with the farm collaborative and the llamas, because then you get the little kids over and we can ask them, what sort of housing will you need in a few years?
Yep, and I used to work in high tech, so I was explaining to Cindy that the trade shows, what you do is you get a toaster oven, and then you get the Toll House cookies that you slice. That or a supermodel, so,
Yeah,
but
yeah, brings
cookies
them
always
in.
beat the supermodel.
Is that true?
I have never
Totally.
seen so
I'm not
many
your target
variety of
customer.
dogs in my life.
Thank you.
Dog show.
A lot, huge, so many
Little dog
dogs.
show.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Great. So we'll turn to our consent calendar, which has a few things on it today, minutes from June 16 and 23, as well as approval of resolution number 5, which is appropriating funds for the development fixes necessary for 53 Forge Road. And I'd take either a motion or any comments.
So-
Consent calendar.
You could, what you got?
Get a discussion, right? So second, I'll second.
Great. More discussion?
I just had a question on the 200,000. Is that an estimate, or do we have a
It's a max.
bid? Are we?
It's up to,
Yeah.
It's up to
Up to-
200,000.
And we do have the
Inspection report.
inspection report had an estimate in it.
Okay.
We actually don't think it's gonna be more than 150, and we put in 50 for contingency.
Okay.
And just to double confirm, the intent is to earn that money back on sale.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any further discussion? We have a first and a second.
Roll call?
Roll call.
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Skippy?
Yes.
Oh, I can't ask Skippy. I
Oh, you
asked
can't, that's
Rachel.
right.
here,
I
yes.
can ask Skippy, but
I'm taking
Rachel,
them back.
John
Yes.
and Kelly,
Yes.
thank you.
I could vote to be here at the beginning, right? That was allowed.
Yes.
Okay, great. I haven't messed up yet.
Sorry about that.
Forgive my ignorance, but what happened?
Oh,
You're now the voting member?
I'm the voting member and Skippy
You're
is
the
still.
alternate?
Yes.
So are you gonna remain the chairman and as an alternate?
The alternate
Don't
can be
miss a
chair.
meeting.
Oh, okay.
TBD.
I didn't know that was.
So real quick, what do we have in the Forge Road today?
What do you mean, what do we have?
Oh, how
Well,
much
so we
money?
got what was it?
I don't know.
995?
I'm gonna figure all that stuff out.
I was just trying to come up with
How much we have
a
in.
list price.
Yeah.
Right?
That's one of the things that I have to work
Okay.
out within the next couple of days.
Okay. Consent calendar, bless you. Passes 5-0. So we'll move on to our first meaty agenda item, which is our initial discussion of a revised deed restriction. This, for the public, is the first time that this is coming before us. So this is going to be the initial presentation, questions, requests for changes, alterations, and then it will come back again. So you will have opportunities to comment on, et cetera, in the future. Staff has broken this up into 2 primary parts for us. The first one is going to be a flat appreciation, first is going to be the kind of rationale overview, then we'll break up the flat appreciation and the capital improvements as separate so we can work through those. So if you guys could do the little intro here, that would be awesome.
Yes, these are just to kind of start off with some changes to the deed restriction. One of the things that we have been seeing with the appreciation cap has been 3% or CPI, whichever is less, since probably the early 1990s. What we have seen is a fluctuation of the consumer price index going up and down and up and down and just all over the place. That it can affect, during one year, it took somebody, if somebody had to sell after they bought, they didn't gain any appreciation for almost a year and a half. They would have to sell their home at the same price if they bought it. Or if they did capital improvements, they'd be able to add that onto it, but they would gain no appreciation. So we felt that also an incentive to maybe to have some people go under a new deed restriction, having a flat 2.5% might push somebody to say, that makes sense to me, I want to go ahead and do a brand new deed restriction. I have put in the an example of what the difference could be between what it is now, 3% or CPI, or what it could be if it was a 2.5% flat, that it would matter to a lot of these units. It wouldn't be based on when they purchased it, it would be based on the day that they started they signed a new deed restriction. So we would take their maximum value at that point in time, they would get brand new 10% worth of capital improvements, and then they would get it at 2.5% at that point in time. The second thing that we're bringing forward is the ability to recap more capital improvements. And so we've added some to the list that we have. We have identified more of the items that we would say would be outside the 10% cap for health and safety items, for energy efficiency items. We've tried to be more, to explain better what we would be looking at if somebody wants to do that. Also, what we would want, obviously, is people to always check with us prior to them doing any capital improvements so that they know whether they get them or not. And we realize that some of the items we've never done before. Replacement of carpet, we've never allowed replacement of carpet before in the past. It usually what happens is if it's not normal wear and tear, it's been in the past what's happened is the seller usually gives a credit at the time of closing for somebody to replace the carpet. Now, at that point in time, they can decide on what they want. But what we have seen that if we do allow somebody to recoup some of that cost, somebody might be able to go into a unit where they won't have to replace that carpet for a few years. So the replacement of carpet, what we're saying is can be done, they can get credit for it, and can be done every 7 years. According to our Marshall Swift handbook, because everything would still depreciate down, carpet usually depreciates anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So that's why we felt that if somebody wanted to replace it every 7 years, we could give them credit for something like that.
Quick question. Does that include hardwood floors?
Hardwood floors, no, what it is, most people, if they do hardwood floors, that to us is a capital improvement. If they go from carpet to hardwood floors, so they've been getting credit for that.
Okay.
In a way that doesn't depreciate.
Everything depreciates.
Okay.
Yep, yeah. So it's even the energy efficiency items and things like that would depreciate down, but things have a different depreciation schedule depending on what it is. Appliances usually have a depreciation schedule of around 15 years. There are some things that depreciate down 20 years or 25 years. So we look through the Marshall Swift handbook that we have, which a lot of appraisers use, and that's what we use to decide on what the lifespan is for that specific unit.
How often is that updated?
We get updates almost on a monthly basis.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else to start? No?
Can I ask her a question about?
Yeah. And I just want to ask Kelly, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't see everyone in the, I can see
Okay.
the presentation.
All right, great. So we're just going to open this up first just for questions, clarifying, and then we'll circle back for objections, alternative thoughts, etc. thereafter. John?
I'm trying to understand your chart on page 11 or page 2.
Me too. I'm completely confused.
So go through the columns. Purchase
Okay.
price at max at 2.5%.
And what this did come from some actual units, just to let you know. And it actually shows units, I don't know why I can't seem to find that chart. The purchase max is what somebody purchased that unit for. And some of these units might have been purchased 20 years ago. So this isn't like the most up to date. So some of these units were purchased at different times. That's why the difference is so big. The ones that show like it didn't really matter was purchased probably within the last year. And that's why you see a negative on that. For the ones that are probably the biggest, they probably were purchased back in the 90s. And that's why you see a bigger difference in some of these. So I didn't take, obviously, what the purchase price would be as of today, because I wanted to show a difference. The longer you own it, obviously, the bigger difference it's gonna be on that.
So for instance, on this first one, 189,825, the current value is only 176,000?
Based upon the CPI,
How
and
could
the
it have gone
189
down?
is what it would be worth if it had appreciated at 2.5% a year.
What it is that current max value is through what the 3% or CPI is. That's what it is 176. If we did the calculation by 2.5%, it would be 189. So the
I see.
first one is at the 2.5%. If we did it at the
I see.
2.5%,
Oh, I see.
that's the larger price. Okay.
I see.
So this current maximum value is what they currently could get. But if it was a 2.5%, they could sell it at the 189.
I see.
And the final column is the maximum sales price as if it was a new unit?
A brand new unit.
Comparable unit coming on was what they would be?
Yep.
Okay.
And even though it says 2020 max sales, it is 2021.
Right.
That's our max 21 prices right now for newly deed restricted
That makes more
properties.
sense. That makes more
Kelly?
sense.
So you,
Oh, sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say, you get down a little further in the chart, and there's at least one that would sell at 386, and a brand new unit of the same type would be selling at 365. So we've started to exceed category. It's between your two little
Got it.
red arrows. So that, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it is a difference. We've talked already that you may get to a point where you have to buy some units back down to, if you still want them to serve that category.
And that's one of the things that we haven't done, is we haven't done a thorough research of, are the prices that we currently have as maximum sales prices, is that really a maximum sales price for that category? Is it, because I think when they were originally set, it wasn't at, if you made this amount, this is all you could buy.
Right.
I think when we did it, and if I can remember correctly, we kind of took an average between what the top would be and what maybe the bottom would be, and we did an average. So, because you talk to some lenders and if somebody's at category 4, it's a possibility more than likely that they would loan for a higher amount than what that 303,000 is.
Right.
So we haven't done that. And one of the reasons is because we still haven't created an affordability standard.
Right.
Once we create an affordability standard, then we were gonna go through and really, are we charging the right rents for that, for those categories? And are we charging, is that really the maximum sales price, or could it be higher, could it be lower?
Yeah, the city in its work to better dial in on Burlingame and even the lumberyard has contracted for some additional work that is going to look at earned income as opposed to area median income within the valley. So as we start to price things like that, so that should be helpful to this kind of broader effort. And we're getting into a tricky area here. I think you guys all realize that. But, I can see why to say 2.5%, but you almost need an immediate line underneath that says, however, it may be reduced up to a certain point based on the
Standard.
condition of the unit and the standards and the sufficiency of the HOA at that point. So, at a prior meeting, we were talking about guaranteeing a 0.5% at the most. I don't know that that's the right standard, or we should keep that, but I think that immediately after the discussion of the 2.5%, so that doesn't get fixed in people's minds, there needs to be that explainer that this may be reduced down to as little as 0.5% a year based on the condition and sufficiency of the condition of the unit and sufficiency of HOA reserves. I mean, that seems to be where we're trying to take that. And I do question whether that's really fair to homeowners. I think you were on Zoom at the last meeting. I'm not sure, but, talking about, what someone's down payment would be to get a $300,000 house and their closing costs and, what they're expected to put in. And I'm okay with it. I mean, I was reading an art magazine the other day, and it said that any homeowner should anticipate at least 1% a year of the original purchase price to be repairs, upkeep, maintenance, at least 1%. And so, there's a balancing that can occur between your 10% that you spend, and you can add on to your price that's then depreciated down, and concurrently your interest, your appreciation over here. So, you can play out the examples, but I'd used some numbers earlier, like 200,000 to keep it simple. So someone would put 40,000 down. Over 10 years, they could add in another $20,000 worth of improvements that would depreciate down. And so if you spend 20,000, that would take you 4 years worth of appreciation to make up for it. So, again, they're balancing out at a certain level there. What doesn't balance out is if someone was sold a home for 200,000, that costs 400,000 to construct. And we're going to measure them when they sell on how good is the condition of the $400,000 investment versus the 200,000 we knew they were capable of paying. So that's where I run into a little bit of a challenge. And you've defined it, Diane, as the first turn, when a lot of these older sellers or older owners are selling, and that the new sellers know fully what they're getting into. And as I've described it, it's the security of knowing where your home is and not having to move, and the chance to build up some equity with prepayment, a chance to potentially pass it on to your children, things like that. But the tax advantage of interest deduction has pretty much gone away with tax reform. And where a home is traditionally most people's largest investment and their potentially largest savings towards retirement, it's really not going to accomplish any of those goals for people. And we need to just make that very clear.
I'm with Rachel on this. My first thought was 2.5%. There we go again, kind of letting people feel entitled about their appreciation. And you're not entitled to appreciation. I don't know why we feel bad that CPI, didn't, a couple of units purchased in 2007 when CPI shrunk to nothing, that they didn't get appreciation. I mean, you're not entitled to appreciation of your home anywhere in the country. People took some major losses in certain markets when the real estate bubble hit.
The free market, especially.
In the free market. And so, first of all, I feel like we need to deal with the capital improvements before we rewrite the deed restriction, right? And my thought on the capital improvements, and Rachel kind of alluded to it, but maybe we just set a bare minimum appreciation number and figure out a way to handle, not improvements, but maintenance of the properties that we've got. I mean, we've got, 3,000 plus units, much, and I hate to use the word much of them in decay, but they certainly have an overhang of things that need to be fixed and worked on and repaired and maintained and preserved, and look for funds to make that happen. And as owners need work done, as owners need roofs replaced, carpet fixed, whatever it is, HOAs are solely missing in capital. A new deed restriction is signed at that point that limits the appreciation of that individual unit with some kind of agreed maintenance schedule that you're not relying on those individual homeowners to make sure stuff happens. That the funds are available, and I've said a little bit that the transfer tax is for housing, and maybe where those funds come from. I'm sure there's a bundle of money in that fund today. And looking
for that lumberyard and for BG3 now.
But do we need to build more before we fix what we got? That's the thing. We haven't fixed the solution that we have today, and building another 300, 400, 500 units doesn't solve 3,000 units problem.
Yeah, no, at our last meeting, it was discussed a little bit, and I think the term was used, I don't know if it was me or you or someone else saying, there's a point at which you will use public money and it will come out of production. But that's okay, because I certainly don't see an ability to go forward to a county-wide question to create county revenues for the housing program, as we've talked about before, kind of similar to our 0.45 city county. you know, it could be done. But I don't see us successfully doing that until people feel the current problems are fixed. And that means investing some of the money that we have now. And I certainly have raised, and I think Skippy, you know, has as well, is aware of it. We've been talking about, should the city be putting more money into the administration of APCHA, at least for a period of time, rather than the traditional 50-50 split that has kept the office under-resourced for years, and I understand why. I was on the county as well. The county doesn't have the money. It comes out of their general fund, and the city has wonderful real estate transfer tax to pay for it. So I'd rather see this office really fully resourced to deal with these issues and get the professional help we need to come up with some new schemes or a new layout, or just this one, whichever one really works at the end of the day. But it takes money to get this back on track.
Yeah, thanks. Rick, I see Kelly's had her hand up since the beginning, and I
no
just want to
worries.
make sure she's not forgotten out there in
TV
in
land.
internet land. And I'll come right back to
Sorry,
you.
Kelly.
Thank you. Eventually, I will jump in and bark, but you know, my question has since evolved into other questions, and John had asked for the explanation that I wanted to. I do appreciate, I think it would help to sort of have a range presented if we continue this forward, related to sales that shows, you know, what the bookends are of 0.5% up to a 2.5 plus 10%, something along those lines. But I also wonder if, you know, just listening to this conversation, if we need to start thinking about at different category levels, you know, not just the affordability of the unit, but the affordability of maintenance, and start figuring out if there's some, you know, do we have some kind of multiplier that plays into that? Because, you know, someone in a category 5 ostensibly has greater capacity for maintenance costs than somebody at a lower category. And should we handle depreciation a little bit differently there, or should we add, you know, think about that a little bit differently about, you know, should a higher percentage cost be allowable to be added on or something? I recognize there's a lot of consequences to that with increasing overall prices and things that we also need to deal with, I think, in our regulations. But, you know, that's just something I'm thinking about. You know, Rachel raised the 1%, you know, I think that's helpful to have a notion in mind when we talk and educate buyers about, like, you should be planning for this amount over the lifetime of your ownership. But that probably is just an average, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that look like at the different levels of ownership? And that's the kind of thing that I think we should also think about communicating here. I do think that, you know, this chart does offer some compelling evidence for people to consider updating their deed restriction, right? Like looking at, oh, this might be the amount that I would earn if I decide to sell in a year or two, versus if I re-enter a new deed restriction, what that might, you know, offer me. And I think that's a really compelling carrot, because, you know, we are looking at kind of how do we offer carrots and sticks throughout this program. And then finally, you know, John, I'm happy to sort of talk about, I'm still going to like promote this program to try and start a loan portfolio that the state will grant to us for capital repairs. And I can tell you more of that info that I detailed to the board at the last meeting. But, you know, I continue to hope that we pursue that. And I think, you know, we need to start thinking about that in terms of staffing and who might manage that type of program. And I know the city, I think, is already getting in their budget process, and the county will be starting ours, you know, towards the end of the summer, but I'll just put that, you know, pitch out there. And then finally, you know, I really do continue to think that it would behoove everyone to support the extension of the sales tax in the county. You know, it wouldn't be a lot. You know, we get, if we mimicked what the city does, then the revenue projections are about $800,000 a year. You know, that's not enough to build a unit, but it could be enough to help fund a repair program, right? So, I want to like take opportunities off the table and, you know, separately from all the work I'm trying to do on just getting federal money to come into our community to help solve our housing problems as well. But I do think that's a local solution that we should think about, and that would require a campaign, quite frankly, that, you know, I for one would support.
Thanks, Kelly.
I have roundabout comments on all the things you've all brought up.
Thank you, Skippy.
Patience.
I kind of agree with the comments made with regards to the capital improvements, that perhaps we should look at maybe increasing those somewhat. I'm curious, though, if you already have a deed restriction right now, can you apply to amend that restriction and apply for this new 2.5%? Because I just did some quick calculations and found that in the last 20 years, if you looked at all these CPIs, they add up to 1.6. So where did we come up with the 2.5% when historically it's only been rising at 1.6%?
We didn't look at how it's been going over the many, many years that we've had this program. We didn't think it was, because right now it's 3% or CPI, whichever is less. We did want to provide a little bit of a carrot. We thought the 3% was too high, and that's why we went to the 2.5%.
Okay, so is it your understanding that if you already have a deed restriction and you've only been experiencing, say, 1.6% annual appreciation, why wouldn't you sign a new deed restriction, which is probably not going to be too more restrictive than what you already have signed, to enjoy a 2.5% increase in appreciation?
Well, we think that would be a carrot for most people. There are some deed restrictions out there that it's a flat 6%. There are some out there that it's 6% or CPI, whichever is less. All of, like, the North 40 RO are all 4%. So
Well,
there
I'm-
are some that I would agree that this is not a big enough carrot. The 2.5% is not a big enough carrot for them. But it might be for some of the older deed restrictions that we might end up losing in another 30 years, something like that are not into perpetuity.
The other piece too is remember the pieces that Cindy's brought to the table, and this is after she and Bethany have spent a lot of time in this. They've consulted with Tom, consulted with me. It's the package of a flat 2.5% plus a reset of your capital. Remember, there are people out there that have run out of capital improvements. They've already got
Right.
to their max,
Right.
and so this is a reset. And the things that are life safety and energy efficiency don't have a cap, would not have a cap under this new one. Now, they would still depreciate, but they wouldn't have a cap. And so, remember, there are other things too out there in some of the old deed restrictions, number one, that don't require them to conform with APCHA regulations as updated from time to time.
Right.
And honestly, just from having had the opportunity to work with these folks for the past 10 months, the opportunity to have more of the housing, APCHA deed restricted housing stock have a similar deed restriction is huge
Agreed.
benefit.
So, just so we're clear, if you bought a unit in 1990 and you've been experiencing roughly a 1.6 annual appreciation, if you signed a new deed restriction today, would that be retroactive
No.
to when you
It
purchased?
would not be retroactive. It would be, we would compute with that, if they sold it today, that's the maximum price we would use, and it would start anew from that
I
date
see.
at the 2.5%.
I see. Interesting.
But then resetting that
With
capital,
that 10% cap at that maximum amount
but
at
resetting
that
that
point in time.
capital budget, what would that be per unit? 10%? What is the number
10% of the new price.
Right, right.
of the price when they sign the deed restriction?
When they sign the new deed restriction.
Go out and drop 20 grand on a new unit and then appreciate it at 2.5%. Are you pushing it out of that affordable category just by doing that?
And it could, again, without really and truly knowing for sure what that true cap is for that category. And you have to also, and this is something that's coming forward to you in a later regulation change, we have Category 1 people that are going for Category 5. So it's and that's one of the reasons why we think we should limit it to, you can bid at your category or up one, but that's a later discussion. But there are people out there who are in units that they were able to get a loan from their parents, they had a gift where they were, or they really do make that much money but they only show this much. So it's and they were still able to afford that higher unit. But so it's a little bit more difficult when you want to do, should we allow somebody at a higher category, like what Kelly was saying, when you do to do more capital improvements or whatever, you really and truly do not, or depreciates down differently, you really don't know what that person's income is at that point in time. Mm-hmm. They might have been a category 5 when they bought. Now all of a sudden everything has changed and now they're a category 1. Do we adjust it? That would be a nightmare for us to adjust it for what somebody's income is at that point in time. I don't even want to think about that. That please don't even think about that. That scares me. So it's this is something that we thought might be just a small little incentive that we could put through that might entice some people to go under a new deed restriction at this point in time. But again, we'll take direction from you if you want to see more stuff. This is our first initial discussion on this. If you want to see more of how something might play out, we're more than happy to bring some of those, more of those examples and stuff back to you as well.
Well, I believe in 2022, CPI will be much more than 1.3%.
Well, it's been going crazy lately. It has been going up. Every month we get a new CPI, and I look at what my price is at this point in time, and then when I add it, and this last time in a month, my property went up over $2,000. Sometimes it'll go up $5. Sometimes it'll stay the same or go down. But progressively over the last few months, it has been taking some pretty big jumps because it's just because the CPI has just been going a little wacky.
Carson?
It's so nice to see everybody in person. Just really enjoy the conversation in person versus Zoom. So, I mean, I'm in agreement with everything that's been said. I guess maybe one thing I would add to it is, I mean, so we've got some of these older deed restrictions that we're wanting to really kind of capture and get these new deed restrictions. And I mean, if I've got one that depreciates at 6, I mean, I don't know if going to 2.5 and getting 10% really helps me. One thing I was thinking about, just kind of looking at your example that you made with the different properties, somebody who's on a property 30 years, you know, maybe that's their neighbor, it's turned over 5 times. And so somebody put a bunch of money into it. So what I think is we should do some sort of multiplier to that 10%. So we figure out whatever the price we want for a category, whatever, 4, 2-bedroom, max is this. And if you're 70% of that value, then we give you 12.5% capital improvements or 15% capital improvements, just to give you, so that if people want to put the money in, because there are people who absolutely want to do that stuff and can't, because either they've hit the cap or the value of their unit is so low that they try and put the money in, it doesn't make sense. So, I mean, I think that would be my only sort of addition to that, would just be some recognition of those units that have been owned for a really long time and have that really low value where I think Rachel talks about some of your neighbors, the value of theirs versus yours are way out of whack.
Yeah, you can, well, the sales that you see that have sold 5-6 times in the same 30 years, resetting the base. You know, it really is something of dividing out the problem areas, as Diane has kind of said, and Cindy, through the various deed restrictions that are out there. I have said I'm not so sure we have to worry as much about as many going free market. I think I have one of those deed restrictions at Hunter Creek. I've been told that by Jim True. And it's would go free market 21 years after the death of the last county commissioner who signed the ordinance or whatever. Michael. So he's going to live a long time. But, you know, at the bare minimum, that would put me up to around 82, 83. I don't think I'll make it that long based on my family history. So I'm not sure how many of those we have to buy out or will, you know, and they're all different. I mean, I realize, and that's a big problem. But I guess a question starts to become, are there so many of those that we want to create this incentive? And as John is saying, we're kind of giving a lot more appreciation to some people who aren't going to be trading in their deed restrictions. I mean, are we going to get enough fish caught for the bait to make it worth the bait that you're giving away to a bunch of other units who might have a fine deed restriction now. So there's that. And the one thing I do want to say is I have a lot of empathy with Cindy and staff and administration about trying to calculate the CPI for each unit that sells. Now that's what's really a disaster, because it's this much this year and this much that year and this much this year, and only 3 months of this year were that rate, and then the other 3 months of that year were this rate. And so, you know, when we talk about efficiencies and creating efficiencies for staff, I would love to find a flat type of rate that we can adopt. But again, for me, I'm continuing to say it's so hard to put things together piece by piece by piece without seeing how they all are going to add up, because the 2.5%, if you bought a brand new unit, you should be still paying something towards when that carpet's going to wear out. Even if you sell it on year 6 and the carpet doesn't need replacing yet, it will soon, or those appliances will soon. And how do you keep it from falling on the burden of the third buyer who bought it when it's 18 years old and more things are starting to go? And so, I mean, how do you require a brand new owner of a brand new unit to start putting something in reserve or in escrow for those repairs to the next buyer, even if they're not needed yet? But it is slowly decaying, no matter what. You know, rust never sleeps. So that's a little bit of what how do I get there? And then the other half is just this 2.5%. Do I want to be the part of an agency that says, yes, you get 2.5% here, and by the way, we're going to pull this much of that right back out for these reasons? And are we, you know, judge and jury, you know, at the same time? And it feels awkward. I'd rather not commit to someone that they're going to get this much than to tell them they're getting this much and then pulling it back out.
Because just to let you know, all the deed restrictions do say that maximum
Is not
is
guaranteed.
not guaranteed.
I know, but it's got to be said like 10 times.
Yeah.
I know.
Quick question. Every year I get an assessment on the value of my house. How do they establish the value? Aren't they calculating these?
No, they get the value from the housing authority, but
So
it's
you guys-
always a year behind because you're paying your taxes in arrears.
Right.
So, and usually, and which I haven't done this year, I usually provide them with, and it's always usually based on the July 1st. And I'm gonna write myself a note, because I'm gonna have to now figure that out and provide that list to the assessor's office. So they usually get that list from us, and that's what they set the
I see.
taxes on.
And you use this on an annualized basis. You don't do it month to month in the
No.
fluctuation.
No.
You take whatever it is at a certain date.
We do, somebody can call us on a month-to-month basis, or now they can look up on Home Track to see what their value is. And it changes on a month-to-month basis. If it's, because it's prorated as well. If it's a flat 6%, it's prorated. So you can see what 1 month it was. Usually you know if it's a flat 6% or 4%, what you get on a monthly basis. But they can now go on to Home Track, and they can actually now, we're still working on the capital improvements, so their capital improvements may not be in there, but they could see what their basic sales price is as of today in Home Track.
I see.
Yeah.
And a quick, sorry, can I do a quick reply to Rachel's
Sure.
piece about, specifically the piece about with brand new units, how you address that? I do think it is likely worth the city council talking about Burlingame 3 and looking at, you know, there are programs that are out there, not that I can name, but that I have heard of, like you put aside X% in a city fund that is,
Or an
you know,
escrow or
or an
something.
escrow, that is, maybe a bond fund to guarantee revenue, to somehow get some market appreciation, because as you've cited, while the home may be reduced price, the repairs are not. And so can you do a set aside for each unit that allows them some type of fund to be used for repairs? Just, it may be worth, where you've got a new project coming up, experimenting with that.
This subject is now so complex to me. I really see us needing a big butcher block and a lot of arrows and a lot of things, because one thing does hit the next. And, you know, based on your question, Rick, something I've been thinking about a little bit, is say you believe your home is $300,000 and you're paying property tax on $300,000, and you go to sell it, and the inspection says, oops, you got to have $40,000 worth of repairs. You home is really worth $260,000.
Correct.
Do you get to go back and get your property tax reduced for the past 10 years because your home really wasn't the value they thought it was?
Yeah.
But
This-
that's leaving
that's
a lot
another
of
can
money
of
on the
worms.
table for some
Oh,
people.
boy.
You know, and you can go back multiple years, because I've sat, as
Yeah.
Kelly has, in hearings about people who want to get a property tax adjustment and rebate from
Yeah.
4 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever. So that's a real challenge. Are our property owners overpaying their property tax now based on what they're actually going to get to sell the unit for? I don't know.
Well, if you're over 65, you only.
I'm
pay
gonna jump in
50%
now.
of what is
So I
taxed.
just want to,
So
I
sorry.
think,
What,
I'm gonna jump in now. I've been sort of waiting pretty patiently over here. So, I do just want to say, back to Rachel's earlier comment, I mean, APCHA is already playing judge and jury in a way. We already have these rates, we already have this calculation defined. And I think staff is, I just want to offer that I think what staff is proposing is actually really offering some more benefit to people in the program than they currently have. And, we need to separate out these decisions a bit. 2.5% is more than what has historically been paid out for a lot of the deed restrictions, or that people would be eligible for under a lot of the deed restrictions. And so, that's an increase for them. And we have to take that, that decision separately as to whether there's merit to make that decision and change it. And, there's just some certainty that gets provided to people, who own, to know, like, oh, I can know what it's going to be, rather than sort of this guessing game, or, gosh, I have years where I appreciated nothing, so, I just want to argue for that point there, in addition to sort of the benefits to the ease of administration, whatever. And then also, the program change being offered here to allow for no cap on appreciation for certain improvements is also sort of a gain for current owners in the program that doesn't currently exist. And, I recognize that I think it's totally fair that depreciation applies to everyone and every improvement, because that's, for me, completely reasonable. But, here's another decision point that we have to make of, do we want to provide that opportunity for owners who want to make some of these improvements, but maybe have hit their cap, or have thought, well, there's not enough in it for me to kind of do that work. So these proposals, I think, are really steps forward from where we're at, as far as from like owners' perspectives, or carrots to incentivize people to make the type of improvements and repairs in their homes that we would like to see for improved maintenance over time. So I do recognize that, like, you pull a thread and that, another thread gets pulled on as well. But these are rules that already exist in our program that, us making these decisions isn't fundamentally changing what we currently have, in my mind. And so I want to separate those out to see if we have a decision, if we can make a decision to move forward on these two separate things that are being offered. Because one to me is, okay, you get the new deed restriction, now you come under, the new rules and the changing rules, and then we continue to go on to have conversations about how to improve all those rules.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. Anyone else have any other questions? I still have a couple.
I have a small comment, but, Kelly, I appreciate what you're saying, and I really fully am in with the ease of administration. But we're becoming a different level of judge and jury when we're asking them to sign a new deed restriction that will say, we can reduce your appreciation down to just about 0.5% if we don't find the condition of your unit sufficient. And that is not what we can do now. I mean, Cindy negotiates with people on replacing the carpet or a small credit, but they don't say, hey, it's 40,000, it's 60,000 less than you thought you were going to sell it for. And that is the change of the new deed restriction. Until we have all the pieces in place and I can know what they are, we're saying, yes, you'll get a higher percentage, 2.5%. Please sign the deed restriction. By the way, we might be able to take the full 2% back away from you later when you go to sell if we don't like the condition of the unit and it's not up to standards. So it is a very different level of judge and jury in my mind.
That part is not in this deed restriction.
It's not, but we're moving there. We're
Yeah.
doing these things piece by piece. We're moving there. I have to look at the totality of what we're planning on doing.
And that's fine, and Rachel, people can make that decision, but other people can't, right? Like, people are gonna sign new deed restrictions that are under these rules. So we already have an inequity in our program, that someone who buys today and closes today is signing a deed restriction that whatever rule we make about this 0.5% or not, like, is gonna be applicable to them, right?
Yes.
So I'm separating those out. You know, I'm separating those conversations out because there is a subset of owners that's going to apply to whether or not they, you know, decide to update a deed restriction or not.
I understand that, and I've just simply asked the question, is this new incentive of increasing the appreciation for up to 1,500 owners, current owners, in order to capture a few people who will try new deed restrictions? I've asked, what is the gain on it? I just don't know, but we're saying that 1,600 of our existing owned units are going to be able to appreciate retroactively over the past 20 years to sign a new deed restriction, and some of them already have the provisions we want in it. You know,
We're not retroactively. That's not
okay,
accurate.
well, let me be clear then. So the 2.5% will only be offered
From
to.
today.
Yeah, from the
Okay.
day you sign it.
Wait, but it will only be offered to do the new deed restriction to owners who have bad deed restrictions we want to get rid of? Or will other owners in our system be able to say, I'd like that new deed restriction too at 2.5%?
To everyone.
Is it
would
available
offer
to
everyone.
everybody?
Yes.
The intention is
Right.
that.
Well,
yeah.
that's
But it
all,
starts
well, that's what
today.
I'm saying. We're going to be raising the appreciation retroactively for all the units that, right now, you said
It's
over
not
the.
retroactive. It's as of the day you sign the deed, the new
Right, but
deed
you'll
restriction.
come up to that.
But then you get 10% to improve, you get the cap raised too, right?
So you will only get the current max on this sheet, not the difference that was shown. You will
Correct.
just
That's
start
correct.
appreciating
That's
from that
correct.
point forward.
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, I apologize, I
Yeah.
didn't
that's
understand
correct.
that
Yeah.
element.
Yep.
And you get the increase in the cap, right?
And you get the
10%.
other elements.
If you don't have that, I liked Carson's idea about looking, you know, the ones that haven't
The
changed
olders.
hands at a period of time, and somebody wants to, it's gonna cost 40,000 versus 20,000 to do something to bring it to some number.
Well, thank you for the clarification. I thought we were going backwards to all these numbers.
Got it. And John, on that one, remember that life safety and energy efficiency will not have a cap under the new deed restriction, right? The 10% cap is kind of for every other kind of deed, you know, talking to staff, there'll be people who come into a brand new unit and wanna change the countertop. Well, they're limited on that.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying. If you've had a unit that's been 20 years old, never been done, 30 years old,
Right.
never, you know, I lived in it for 30 years.
Right.
And it's appreciated at CPI for a period of time. I didn't do any work to it, so, but there's the next buyer comes in and wants to buy it, and he gets the 10%, whatever that number is, but he wants to replace the cabinets because they've never been replaced. He wants to replace the bathtub and the shower and the whatever. Those things are expensive, and those aren't life safety. And so you hit that cap fairly quickly just on updates on some of these units.
Well, your neighbor's house could be worth $100,000 more than yours, and so they get they get an extra 10% or an extra 10 grand just because of the increased value. So I'm just saying, for the stuff that's way underpriced, and the people who are willing to spend the money to update the unit, let's let them.
And so this basically, what the mechanism there would do would be providing an extra incentive relative to the age and then, you know, likelihood that it needs more work. And it wouldn't change the max number because ultimately you get to a point of equilibrium. Is that
Exactly,
accurate?
right.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense to me. I'd be interested in looking at that. Question I have, so I understand that signing this new deed restriction would give you the 2.5 flat. I understand the carve out for the environmental stuff, which makes sense. I need to understand the 10% cap a little better. I understand it resets, but once it resets, are we changing in any way in this how that 10% works thereafter?
No, I guess I'm confused. And also, because a lot of people think that, well, I bought my house, we actually, just to let you know, we have units that were sold for $40,000. So they have $4,000 that they can use for capital improvements, and that's it. Because then they're category ones up at Highlands. So I just want you to know, it really does depend on what you
Right.
bought it for. But what happens is when you buy a piece of property, or you buy your property for $100,000 and you get $10,000 worth of capital improvements, as you use the capital improvements, they depreciate down.
Right.
You always have up to that 10,000. So when they depreciate down,
get
you
to use
can
that
get
rolling
back
back.
up to that 10,000. And you don't have to wait for a certain length of time. You can't do the same thing year after year after year. But if you do different things, you can always work yourself back up to that maximum capital improvement. So it's not that once you've reached that, that's it. When it depreciates down, you always have that amount to work with.
Yeah, and that's the same condition as now, it just continues and gets
Exactly.
reset.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to understand.
And just so we're all make sure we're clear, and that is exclusive of life safety and energy efficiency,
Yes.
which is, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll add like just a couple comments and then kind of circle back for some board direction. What staff was looking for today is, you know, either a nod, yes, we like this, please bring it back in a first reading, or we like it, but, and please bring it back altered, or, you know, please go back to study X, Y, and Z. That's what we're kind of looking for. You know, I think that we're sort of in the condition of there's a bunch of Lincoln logs that are thrown into the middle of the table, right? This is like the condition that we've inherited, and not through any fault, but it's, you know, 50 years into a program, a lot of stuff we couldn't plan for. It would be amazing to be able to perfectly design something, but the reality is before you can rebuild the Lincoln log house, you gotta take apart the pieces and figure out how many of each one you have and line them up. And I sort of think that's where we are. And we as a board are taking on these very interrelated things separately so that we can have enough clarity to move forward rather than getting stuck in the vortex of inaction that was many previous groups. So I guess I accept a little bit of imperfection as we move into this to move forward, knowing that as we move forward, we're going to learn more in action, and then we can simply change those things and make them better. So I personally would love to see some version of this move forward. The other things that were mentioned by you guys, I think, are incredibly important, interrelated, and should be acknowledged. Which is just the affordability of maintenance, right? That's something that will come back in the standards for seller piece or bringing some of that in-house. The inequities of purchase price versus maintenance price, the multiplier effect that we can realize here, and the carrot to bring people into a system that has more accountability, right? So I think this is one of those constituent pieces, and I think it fits together nicely. So yeah, that's all there. The 2.5%, I will want at a further reading more very specific of why 2.5, not 2.6, not 2.7, not 3. And it's just, you know, over the lifetime of ownership, those small numbers make a big difference. And so I just want to understand really why we ended up there.
Can we talk about that one?
Well, why
I
not two?
don't want to interrupt you, but
Right.
but I mean, I think that would be one to talk about with the board tonight if possible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so if you guys, yeah, I would love to learn why not that. And I think for me, the goal is we want to create a carrot. We want people to come under the new deed restriction that both offers them a legitimate benefit, but also then ties them to new accountability to make sure long-term that we maintain things.
But it
Sounds like
doesn't
that
change
balance.
their accountability today. This deed restriction doesn't change anybody's accountability.
But it does long-term, because if they come under it, then their deed restriction automatically updates, and then when we do standards for sellers, then they are part of that.
And that goes to Rachel's point then about telling them you're gonna take 2% away.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
should be
and
super clear.
again-
We should be super clear.
And again, that
I look at it-
0.5% was a staff.
It was a
staff
trial balloon.
Yeah, it was a
You know
trial
that.
balloon specifically responding to not wanting anybody who owns a property to go upside down, which is different than the free market, right? Lots of people went upside down in the past, have gone upside down in the past, so, Skippy, should we jump to what you said about the 2.5%?
If that's where you wanna go,
Yeah,
that's
do
fine.
you wanna
Then we
start,
can
and then
circle
I'll
back.
take it from there?
Well, I literally can't give you probably a very, very solid reason why we went to the 2.5% versus a lower number. I didn't want to go at a higher number. I mean, but we felt it was enough of an incentive that the people who we would really like to, not everybody, obviously, but we would get more of a majority of the people to want to go under this new deed restriction versus if it's lower, not wanting to go under the new deed restriction. And I think that's why, and yet it wasn't the 3%. It was kind of not a compromise, but it was at least an incentive enough that yes, I will decide to go ahead under this because I can get a little bit more. Granted, I have to do more under it. I have to make sure my unit is in better shape. Well, because some deed restrictions, I'll tell you, when I first started working with the Housing Authority, people bought as is, and they weren't even clean. So honestly, it was unbelievable how we sold some of these units. And we have totally done a 180-degree turn and at least require certain things that every buyer or every seller has to do. So, but I think that was our logic behind that 2.5%. Did we do any real study on it? No, we truly didn't do a study on
So I
it.
think the logic makes sense, but when it comes back at first reading, I would like a bit more thought on the methodology.
Yeah, and
I don't have a
Skippy,
problem going
yeah.
lower or higher. I'm just looking for the right balance.
Here's the thing, Skippy, there's not more stuff behind that. What I'll add to what Cindy said was, I actually think it is very strategic, because Cindy has done a lot of some other analysis on deed restrictions. We know we've got 6% out there. We know we've got, and this is a number that is in that category of reasonability. I was in a program in a different community where it was a flat 3%, and it had a 10% straight line depreciation on everything, which is awful, right? So I think if you, and you can't, from my perspective, you can't take the 2.5% in isolation, specifically because we're providing those other things in the deed restriction, which includes, as Cindy pointed out, the standards. For some people, it will be now they're under APCHA regulations as updated from time to time. The carrots of things we want, which is that no limit on life safety and energy efficiency, and you get the new 10%. So it's that trying to put the secret sauce together, right? You're trying to put the cake together and say, what's the right combination? So it ultimately comes back to the board and says, hey, look, we've given you a bunch of data. If there's additional data we can give you, we can do that. But there's not I don't think there's a lot more stuff. And then it comes to the board and says, what's the right mix for you?
Well, maybe one small thing that we could do in a short period of time is just find 15 owners who have these older units and just, show them the prototype and say, what do you think about this?
What is
Example. I've been
energy
in that unit for
efficiency?
Over 30 years.
I mean,
Talk
is
to
there a
this guy.
cap? Is there a depreciation? What do we,
It's everything from insulation to lighting to
Windows, doors.
Yes.
Or
Like
windows
if I wanted to put windows and doors on my
double pane
house,
windows,
brand
more
new
energy
windows
efficient.
that were much more efficient, dual pane, triple pane, whatever they are, is that unlimited? So I go drop $100,000 and make, is that unlimited? Is it a depreciable thing? What is it?
Well,
And
it
it
would, again,
depreciates.
it would depreciate down, but again, it would depreciate down over what a window like that would depreciate down. So it'd be 15, 20 years, depending on what it is. So, what the people are talking about solar, and solar is another thing that's really important. But we're also working with the Climate Office and CORE as to what we can do energy efficiency wise with grants and things like that they've got as well. And we plan on bringing that the second meeting in August. So so there are other aspects of this as well that we think that can also help people. Not, if they want to do more energy efficient.
Well, I called you on
efficient
solar
items as
the other
well.
day, right? But solar is an energy efficiency. It's just an alternative source of energy that I'm still gonna use the same amount of electricity in my house, whether it was solar or whether it was from the grid,
Generally
right?
it generally would affect it because your energy bills are lower.
Okay.
It may be, it's a great point, but maybe it's worth saying, energy efficiency or, self-generated non-fossil fuels, or, added in, that's energy efficiency and power generation on site, or something like that, to cover solar.
Yeah, and John, here's the thing, right? We always have to anticipate that there might be an outlier that's gonna put in $100,000 worth of windows. The reality of that is on a scale of the size of this program is probably more limited. And can we account for the outliers? Well, depreciation will probably help some, because they're probably not moving out the next year if they dropped $100,000 on windows.
Well, and the question to me becomes energy efficiency with HOAs too. How do you encourage an HOA to replace the windows in a 12-plex, right?
Right.
Or go more insulation, higher R value in their roof or something,
It's a
right? How do
huge
you
special assessment.
how do you do that, right?
Oh, huge. And here's the thing is, I think, right, and I'm, right, I fall between wanting to take an incremental approach so we can take baby steps and make some progress. I also very much appreciate Rachel's, these things do not operate in isolation. And what I appreciate about the approach we're taking right now is, the biggest impact of a lot of this stuff is on single-family homes, right? That 10% cap, there's not that much you can do in a condo for energy efficiency independent, right? That kind of stuff. And honestly, if we get this far with this, the next big hurdle, it's a big hurdle, but all of a sudden it seems more achievable, right? And staff is working on the seller standards, and we do think that we can do this and then address the seller standards. Like, we think we can take these in stepwise.
So I'm gonna ask you guys to summarize all sort of the notes we've heard in a minute. I'm just giving you the heads up because it's probably up to. I haven't heard much from Mr. David Loughran, so I wondered if you wanted to chime in while they put their bullet points together.
I just keep thinking about my own home and how I would be affected by it. And basically, it still seems unclear to me from this conversation how I'd be affected by it. But I'm just listening tonight for the most part. This is a big topic.
It's a big topic. Do you know, I mean, you don't have to disclose it publicly if you do, but do you know what your existing deed restriction says in terms of regular update or appreciation and those things? Because if you do, we could probably give you the,
Well, I'm pretty certain it's 3% or CPI.
whichever's less,
Yeah,
Snyder.
and you've owned your unit for 20 years?
25 years,
something like that.
something like
So
25
just from
years.
this graph, correct me if I'm wrong, there's somewhere in the 10 to 20 grand would
David's
be the
unit was
delta.
7 down.
Has the little
That's what
T
that
next to
stick
it.
figure meant. It's somewhere in that like 10 to 20 grand range that if this had existed when you purchased, you would have earned it. You're not going to earn that retroactively, but you have a sense of if you were to come under it, you could expect some payoff similar to that, greater. Plus, you'd reset your 10%, and your deed restriction would update regularly from then on.
So I think incrementally, you know, does this, my other question becomes, does this create more clarity for staff, for you? You know, because all of a sudden now you've got another deed restriction to manage, and these are all 2.5%. But to me, the big advantage is helping clean that up if it does, and then increasing that 10% cap.
Well, it would really
Giving
depend,
people more
obviously, on
space.
how many people would actually go under this. And there might be other incentives. Right now, we don't allow any common capital improvements to be added. So, then whether it makes sense to say, you can also add an additional 15% of what has been added, if it's energy efficiency wise or water conservation or whatever, for your property, for the HOA, each person can, whatever the bill was, it's that a certain amount of that proportion you could add on top of it as well. But again, it would depreciate down. Maybe that's another incentive to add on to some of these as well. This to us was a good start to get. Mine is where I live. It's a flat 10% for the life of the unit. I've already used mine. Mine was $18,000, and so I could do whatever I want to it, and I don't get any credit to it, which I don't care. If I want to do it, I'm going to do it. I don't care if I get the money back or not, because that's my home. And some people feel that way. But it's how can we get the first step? And if we do know, what we'll see is, if somebody went under a new deed restriction of so-and-so, we know it's this. So that helps us as well. Anything after, I think, 1994 or 1995, we know it's 3% or CPI, whichever is less. It's in perpetuity. There's certain things that we do know about it. Even though we still feel we should really kind of look at it if somebody has a specific question about their deed restriction. The North 40, your guys' is a 10% from the original purchase price for the life of the unit.
The original established value,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the other part you brought up was HOAs, right? And that's seemingly addresses one of the biggest examples I use all the time, and why I'm on the board here was, you know, we make loans to HOAs often to do common area improvements, roofs, you know, siding of a building,
Right.
whatever it is. But the pushback, I remember making a presentation at one of the HOAs out at Highlands, and they were like, why would I replace the roof on my unit? You know, they're getting 20 years old. I have a buddy that's very proactive and wants to be responsible and was trying to get his HOA to do that. And that was one of the comments from somebody we're good friends with, was why would I want to replace that addresses it, right? If they get that, all these units replace the roofs, or they replace the windows on the building.
They can get a certain amount of credit over a
They
certain length of time.
get a credit towards their value. Each individual gets a credit towards their value that depreciates over a period of time, right?
But
So-
if the roof does.
Yeah.
You should probably, HOA should be part of this too, because you get,
And honestly, if there's
Educate.
something that you want us to, and I know we're way past the time that we were going to be discussing this.
Okay, I want to do these things
Okay.
right, and if it gets pushed to the next meeting,
Okay.
let's spend 30 years, let's get it done.
Skippy, I'm willing to support the 2.5% without a lot of additional background. And, you know, part of it for me is that today's interest rate environment is not going to last for long. And while people are able to buy these homes at the pretty good, 2.5%, 3% now, depending on their qualifications, it could very easily be significantly higher in a few years. And that somebody getting 2.5% return on their investment in their home would probably be reasonable. And if it's much lower than 2.5%, you're not going to have anything to deduct from, when you want to make those repairs, depending on what becomes the next steps in the guidelines. And I think that one phrase, and will comply with the guidelines as they change from time to time, is the most fearful phrase a government could ever issue. It's just like, what are they gonna say? What's next? What's next change? And so it is gonna take some incentive to people to get over that concern. That's all. What if the guidelines change to say you have to have worked 15 years before you can retire in a unit? What if the guidelines could change to say this? I think people's fear of the unknown is our biggest obstacle to overcome, and I'll support 2.5% to try to get there.
So I'd just love if you guys, if staff can just sort of summarize the additional things that you have heard that will get thought about or included into the thought process before this comes back to us, and then we'll go around the horn and make sure everyone's aligned on that, and then we can move on, hopefully.
So I will give you the what I think you like.
Yes.
Thanks,
Feels like a
Diane.
junior high school exercise.
Correct.
The new, that a reset of capital improvements, the 10%, like that. That there's not a limit for life safety, energy efficiency and renewables, and actually I heard Cindy say water efficiency, which we definitely want to get in there, right? If you can replace a 6-gallon a flush toilet with a dual flush or something of that equivalency, that is valuable to this community. As Rachel has pointed out, the APCHA regulations as updated from time to time. And remember, some of them along the way have that. It's just that some of the super old ones are like that. I heard light clarity for staff. The moving forward to the standard deed restriction. And I want to pause here for a moment and just point out that something that this agency does, that Cindy and team does, that is excellent. And it's actually in 2016 when I came out here as city manager of Park City, and I grabbed Mike and talked to him for 2 hours and said, what should we be doing? Because we had just allocated $40 million for affordable housing. We had 400 units in our program in about 4 or 5 years ago. And Mike said, update your deed restrictions every time the property turns. #1 thing you should be doing. And it was groundbreaking because we didn't have that. And so we started to do that. And the fact that this team does it is amazing, because what it means is that some of those expiring deed restrictions are no longer expiring because the unit turned over. And so this is not only, even if we don't get a giant adoption immediately, which I think,
overshoot.
right, we will advertise the heck out of this of what are the advantages, and we can help homeowners understand this is what it can do for you, and your specific deed restriction. Maddie's now quivering, going, what am I doing when they call me? The other piece is that for a Burlingame 3, right, now you've got this new deed restriction in place. Standard. The one that I'm still a little fuzzy on, and I'm a little bit afraid of, so I've been avoiding it, is the one that Carson, you suggested, just because I'm worried about the math problem.
I mean, I would envision it to be very simple, where you would just, and I can back into numbers and give you some sort of a calculation. I mean, really all we would need to do is figure out what is the target price for 1-bedroom category 4s, 2-bedroom category 4s. And so we'd have a target price or a maximum price or whatever. And then you just say, okay, they're at 70% of that. And if you're within, say if you're within whatever number we wanted to say, 85, 90% of that, there's no change. But if you're way below, there would just be some sort of multiplier to the 10% just to give you some additional appreciation. And I'm happy
for kind of cosmetic things.
Well, not cosmetic, but just in addition to the cap. So the kitchen or
Renovation.
Wood floors or, right, I mean, so.
Your cap could be 15
Well, you've got an
instead of 10.
easy-
They'd still qualify underneath the same sort of things. It's just, like the perfect example. I mean, I have neighbors who their unit is literally $100,000 less than mine. So when I'm doing my kitchen, I had an extra 10 grand to work with that they didn't have.
Right.
And so, and theirs desperately needs it, right? And so it's, and they would want to do it, right? And so it's just, I'm just thinking, like, if you have somebody who wants to do it, like,
How do you
help them to do it,
tools?
right? I mean, they're effectively being punished because they've stayed in their unit
For so long.
for so long, and I just,
Yeah, no, it is a really good idea, right? And it benefits the program because it gets the unit updated with our other people's money.
Correct.
And it starts to depreciate back down.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they get to enjoy it while they're
Right.
there instead of paying it all out when they leave.
Right, but so they, right, exactly. But then they
Yeah.
live there 10 more years, and instead of having a 40-year-old kitchen, it's a 10-year-old kitchen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a
Wasn't
good,
that your example here, the one, like the top one, 176,000 is the current max value, when the 2020 max sale for that unit's 300,000.
that could give you a
So
little
you
more
know
repair money.
that person's owned that for a really, really long time.
Right, and think about, this just popped into my head, so I haven't thought it through. What does it look like for a condo versus a townhome versus a freestanding home?
You know,
What's
that,
the difference between a condo and a townhome?
Yeah.
What someone, maybe nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe
Because
nothing,
they've
'cause
all-
it's a
Freestanding
shared,
home.
They
it's
all
a-
have their own target price.
They do, they have their own target price, but the single-family home and the condo
Are different.
have different responsibilities for the capital improvement.
yeah,
Right, but the HOA condo piece is a completely,
Yeah, it's gotta be dealt
Understood,
with.
what I'm wondering is, do you end up giving the condo person, more value, basically you're giving them more
Bang for their buck.
value for their buck because they don't have to deal with roofs,
well,
foundation.
you know, not if you bring the HOA into that question. If you're in a 30-year-old condo, Hunter Creek, that's behind on its capital reserves, it's maybe more that goes to sufficiency of that person's capital reserves as opposed to interior of the unit. Because, again, you just don't want someone buying a unit and the livability's all fine, but then they get hit with a $5,000 special assessment.
Right, but this amount of money doesn't go to the HOA,
But
right?
this is one where if you
But it
got
could
every
be.
homeowner in a condo association, which is probably an impossibility in some of the bigger ones, say, we want to replace the roof on all of our condos or whatever improvements they want to do. If all of them signed a new deed restriction, right? They can replace the roof. And does that count to their 10% then?
Let me just put a pin in
Yeah.
that one to ask a question. So if we're just looking at the inside, outside of the HOA bit, what Carson's saying makes sense to you, because I hear support there. I know you have the question about single family home versus anything
Right, that's the
else.
only,
I think you guys can look at that and
sense,
talk to
yes.
Carson, but it makes sense. Then like the second piece, the HOA piece, I think is a great idea, and something
It
that
takes more working out.
I would support. My question about that is, as a board, we said we're not going to look at capital reserves until this other lawsuit thing has gone away. This seems like it could be one of the bigger carrots in that conversation. So does it make sense to talk about that now, or would it be more strategic to talk about it later?
Well, and maybe each association, it's a separate thing. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
this is one program.
Yeah.
That's a great
Individual
idea.
deed restriction, but if you have an HOA that comes to you and wants to mimic this program within the entire condo association, would you allow that
I
too?
think
Absolutely.
I think that's a better way to do it, because then we're not mixing up an individual deed restriction.
Right.
Um,
There's that, and then again, I'd love to have a larger conversation just about condos and HOAs
Yeah.
entirely, but we've talked about it a little bit, and it was like from years ago with the capital assessment working group, that if people who, when they buy a new home, and we knew the HOA is undercharging, is underfunded, that on a short-term basis, we keep escrow accounts for those people so that they won't get hit with that larger special assessment. So we might have to have a temporary bridge program until you can get your home HOA to say, yes, it's worth doing. Or so that person, at the very least, as these sales happen, maybe have 4 out of a 10-unit condo who've now gotten some escrow money ready for those capital reserves, and again, at least it's trying to prevent harm to the next buyer. How do we set up a program for that when we still haven't dealt with capital reserves entirely?
But that penalizes the people that have been putting the monies aside. In other words,
It may or may not. If they've been putting in enough, that's great, and their HOA is well funded, then you don't have to do something like that. I just don't want to sell someone a unit when the HOA's.
So they're playing the game right, and they're putting their monies away. They've got great reserves, and then you want to subsidize somebody that's buying into an association that doesn't have their stuff together.
No, I'm saying that new buyer would be told what the real cost is going to be, that they're going to be hit with special assessments, and and that the old seller might be able to increase it. You know, as I said, it's a much larger conversation,
Yeah.
Rick,
No,
than
we
saw that one in
we're,
there.
yeah,
This is-
than we're doing now, but condos are a separate animal, because they have to be looked at for all the intricacies. They're just a separate from single-family
It's
homes.
a huge can of worms.
So I think what I heard there you go.
And I guess what I would just add, Diane, to your question about single families versus condos is I hear your point about the differences in, you know, if you're looking at just a condo, is it unfair to the single family homeowner? And I guess my thought on that is I mean, the majority of the condos that we'd be looking at are at a much lower price
Right.
than the single family. So
Yeah.
So the amount that you're going to give them isn't going to be exponentially more.
I think from a percentage standpoint, it is, but from a dollar standpoint, it's not.
Right. Right, got it.
And it's a concept. We have to
Right.
kind of keep
Right,
working
just
through
an
it.
idea,
I
right.
think it's a great
Yeah.
concept.
Kelly.
The end's
I'm gonna
hurting.
get better at this,
Her
I'm
arm's
sorry.
hurting.
My bad.
Sorry, I haven't been there that long. I do just want to sort of throw out an idea, trying to think through Carson's, suggestion, and then think of a way to be simple about it. You know, if we look at, like, I don't know, an appreciation percentage based on the category max sales price, you know, would that set in kind of more real world, real time numbers, you know, what somebody's improvements might actually be worth? You know, so if we're looking at a home, you know, this $176,000 home because it's old, and they're getting, instead of a 10% based on that value, what about a 10% based on the category value? You know, that might give that additional and, you know, opportunity to put more money in to
Simple.
make the improvements for their home. I don't know, I haven't fully thought that out, but just something that could be a little more streamlined in terms of how you calculate what that amount
Consistent
is.
metric.
Yeah, like a 10% of the max category value, so you're not penalizing people who are
Right.
slightly below. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess my only thought there would be that if
Just
you've
an
got
idea.
the properties that are at 90 or 95% of the max value, and then you're adding the 10% on there, you're making, because they would be eligible too, right? So then you're making them that much more unaffordable, right?
They would have the
Potentially.
10% anyway.
Yeah, it was 300,000, because you're close to it, you'd have
Y-
290
y-
I
versus
see what you're
30.
saying.
Yeah, and they're more likely to be the newer units if they're at
Yeah.
95% of what they need to be anyhow.
This is way more fun.
I would just say that problem of teasing out what happens when people
I
maintain their
agree.
unit to a point above, you know, their category costs. You know, we have to sort of tease that problem out, I think, a little bit separately anyway, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Two things on another question you asked. Was there anything else we'd like to add to this?
Yes.
And looking at the packet, my thinking it's on page 26, where we have the kind of blue lines and scratched out. The only thing I really think is under permitted capital improvements needs to be the explanation about them depreciating down over time, that all capital improvements depreciate over time, and then also explaining that mechanism where your 10% renews to, on some units, I guess, but this is the new deed restriction, so it would be on all. But explain how that happens, that somehow, because, again, I've owned a unit for 30 years, and I always thought it was 10% period, and it never renewed, and maybe it is, but, everything I've done is depreciated down anyhow. But it just needs to be explained in this section, right next to the title. Thank you.
So Dan, I think what we got from that is we do want to see something explored that's simple in Carson's suggestion for inside. There is board interest in an HOA type thing, but that will likely happen as a test as a condo thereafter, so we don't need to bring that back.
Do you want us to consider putting some type of language in here about common expenses?
No.
At this point, not at this time.
I
I'm
need more
fine with that.
discussion.
I'm fine with letting it go
I
for
heard they were
now.
okay with.
Yeah.
segment
It's
it.
super interesting, and it's okay that it's not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We
That's
fully
fine.
intend to address the
Yeah.
whole capital reserve
Yeah.
and outside thing as soon as we're able and bring the full debt.
And,
So,
and Carson, do you still want to explore the calculation versus, of,
If you just give me if you just give me a couple of scenarios, like maybe a couple that are old, a couple of what's the max sales price, and let me just mess around with the numbers and just see if I can come up with something simple.
Well, I
Okay.
think that.
And then we can
Max
look at
sales
Kelly's idea
and you
too
could
of
look
the
at Kelly's
10%,
idea
Yeah.
like,
versus yours,
and
yeah,
just
that's
figure
what I
out
was saying,
which
like,
is-
take a
which
look
is
at,
yeah, that's great.
Most,
more beneficial.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
more
I agree with
beneficial,
that.
and
But
then look at
keeping- with the
is-
goal of keeping
is
it simple.
simplicity, yep.
Are there any other notes that you guys have from us there that we have not reviewed?
I don't,
The only other question I had written down then, which you may have an answer for, or it can just be considered, but in the amendment, it said, I think, oven, fridge, and microwave, and I was just curious why we specified those three things rather than saying fixed kitchen appliances or something.
Well, right now, ovens and ranges are not a capital improvement
So we're adding those in.
because they're not an energy efficiency item. And usually what we would look at what core would allow, what they would give a rebate on. And they would never give rebates for ranges or stoves, but I can't tell you
But
how
for the
many
capital
times that
reserves,
really
or
should
for-
be replaced.
But for the capital improvements.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, and I think, because those are the most common appliances, and that's why that was put in there, those specific type, and that's why.
Okay, I mean, I would just, I don't know, maybe I cook more than most people, but I would just suggest anything that's fixed in the kitchen, should be applicable to that, because people have different stuff in there.
Yeah, but you expect a place with a kitchen.
Yeah.
With a refrigerator and a stove, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of that's
Yeah.
why they don't get credit for them. You don't get credit for them today. Like,
You do if you could buy an energy efficient refrigerator.
Yeah. Over time, all the efficiency of appliances has come up so much to the Energy Star
It's better.
standard. That's why Core stopped giving rebates for buying them, because they're all pretty much at a high energy standard. But it doesn't bother me that you list some of the appliances that qualify.
We'll look at that again and see if maybe
Yeah.
there's something that we should
appreciate
add or
those on
whatever.
they
Yeah,
are.
I was just curious.
appreciate
I don't
it,
have any, I think that people need to replace those things and they're expensive, so I don't have an issue. I'm just curious about the specification versus the broader.
Why do they need to if they're working just fine? I'm in my place almost 30 years, and every appliance I have is still working great.
And they
It's
will
'cause you
until they
eat
stop
out
working.
I don't eat out.
Yeah. You eat here,
My
that's why.
dishwasher may need to be replaced, but
Right, we don't have
I'm
to
looking
get
at
into
all
the
these
details
things,
now.
I'm going, well, I should, I have the money now, I should probably replace them, but
Yeah.
what's the incentive to me if they're
I
working just
know.
fine?
Yeah.
I have the
And so
same
I'm trying
from
to hear what-
1995.
it's in the same category as cabinets, right? They work fine,
Yeah, that
Yeah.
they're just.
but you might be done with honey oak.
That's the one item I've wondered about too, Rick, because we try to promote reuse, recycle, not just the throwaway society or whatever. But the only way to do that fairly would be to have some sort of credit to the new buyer, because it's worked fine for 30 years, and I'm in the same boat. I got a
Yeah.
brand new dishwasher. I have barely used it. If I've run it 10 times since I replaced it, I would be amazed.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to die, but maybe the washers will get dried out and the rubber will crack, from misuse and not lack of use. But maybe you could give a credit to people to say, no, these appliances have not been replaced, but here is the $4,000 escrow to replace them when they do break, because they might just, the minute you leave,
Yeah,
The
they
minute
not
you
be
sell
great.
your place, the
Right,
the
and
new
they-
person's
when
gonna
they stop
go in
working,
and
they
it works
stop
fine
working.
for me,
Yeah.
but then it's
I
gonna
didn't mean
die.
That's
to-
right, that's right. And so you can't,
Yeah.
you just can't, so how do we come up with a program that doesn't discourage waste of a usable machine? And at the same time, not leave someone else with the question mark of, does it have 6 months left or 6 years left? And so the only way I could see to do that would be a credit.
Yeah.
Or
Or you
replacement.
replace them.
Yeah, it's been currently replaced, or it's a credit because it's 30 years old, it's still running. Here, you, the new buyer, you get a nice credit, I don't know if the board will want to do that or not, but it's either that or tell people to rip them out after 10 years, even if they're still functioning, and
Right.
try to sell them down at Restore.
Alright. That was the only thing.
Donate 'em.
We wanna open up a whole can, but,
Yeah,
alright.
yeah.
So hearing staff, it sounds like there's, would like to see this move forward in some way.
Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, it just really good work, guys.
Yeah.
This is not easy stuff. Okay. Well, does anyone need like a quick bathroom break or anything before we roll into the next one? Okay. So we're gonna close that section for anyone who's watching. Is anybody watching? On revised deed restrictions and move into discussion of more amendments, new amendments, different amendments to the housing regulations. We are going to, there's 3 different ones here, guys. We're gonna break them up into individual sections. So staff will present on one. We'll then do questions, talk about it. Staff is looking for the same thing, either direction to bring something back at first reading, direction to bring back with amendments, or send it back to the drawing boards. We're gonna end at 7, whether we're through this or not. So if we get through 1, 2, or 3, it'll just be on our own pace. There's more to come down the pipe in 2 weeks anyways, and they're gonna get bundled up in a first reading, is my understanding.
Is Tom gonna pipe up on?
Tom is going to present special review.
Okay.
Great, Tom, so if you can take us through the opener for removal of special review regulations.
Okay, first I have to point out a mistake in the memo that you have. So, paragraph 1,
House grievance.
it refers at the very beginning to the grievance procedure has always had limited
I
applicability.
kind of thought that.
That's a mistake. It should say the special review procedure. I apologize for that. Because the special review procedure, as I mentioned later on in my memo, has, and that's the same mistake at the beginning in number 2. It says the grievance procedure when it applies. That should say special review. I don't know what I was thinking. But the opposite is true. In other words, the grievance procedure does have pretty broad applicability to any dispute that with staff that may occur. So that should say special review. But otherwise, it's I think an accurate depiction of what staff and I see as the scope and the applicability of special review, as well as the problems we encounter with that process. I think that the memo is pretty self-explanatory, so I won't go into great detail, and I'd be happy to answer your questions, but the essence of it is this. Special review only applies when someone wants to get into the system, acquire a unit as a tenant or an owner. We have a lot of trouble justifying bending the rules for people trying to get in because the rules are very specific. They've been thought out in great detail and adopted by the board in great detail. And the problem of bending the rules for one person is that you then have to bend the rules for somebody else. And I think staff would prefer an approach that if the rules are proving to be inadequate, that the issue come to the board and that the board decide if the standards for acquiring a unit or becoming a tenant need to be changed, and they change for everybody rather than on a case-by-case basis. I have to say, and I can't think of a case where staff has recommended either to the board when special review used to come to the board or now with the hearing officer that somebody be granted special review approval. In addition to the precedent question, we have the criterion of hardship, which for housing in Aspen and Pitkin County, everybo's got a hardship. So it's a criterion that becomes very difficult to apply given the context in which we need to evaluate that criterion. So our recommendation is that the special review procedure be deleted. We still have, if there are disputes with staff by anyone for basically anything, where APCHA staff is applying the rules, if they think they're being treated unfairly or improperly, a grievance procedure is available. You start with the hearing officer, and you can go to the board. But we're not in favor of special review because it ends up allowing people to get around the rules on what we think is really perhaps maybe the most important issue that staff administers, which is who gets housing. And to have the kind of flexibility that requires the rules to be superseded by an individual's special circumstances is kind of scary to staff and to me, because it can set bad precedent for future applicants. So that's the essence of it.
Thanks, Tom. So I'll turn it over to the board for questions first, just for clarification, and then we can go around and see if there are any objections or changes.
Is this gonna require a motion?
Today?
Yeah.
No.
Not today.
No. Today, again, we're just looking for, can staff bring this back at first reading, with
So we're trying
changes,
to-
or?
This is to get the sense of the board, because it has to, if it gets, we need to know if we should put it through that public
Yeah.
hearing process, first reading and public hearing at second reading, or if you just want to kill the idea now, or if you want to change, to keep the essential idea of it, change its terms. So
The goal
what we're
of
about
this
today.
is to take this out so that there's no
It's
perceived
standardized.
or real favoritism, right? Somebody asks, I got an issue, I should get special treatment.
These arguments
Correct.
are all worthy of.
What have we seen in special review process in the past?
Yeah, what's made it through?
Well, I'll defer to staff for the details, but I haven't seen one of these granted. I can't even remember how long ago it was that I saw one granted, because right now, the hearing officer is sensitive to our concerns about precedent, and so scrutinizes them pretty carefully. But Cindy, maybe you can comment on cases that have come up in the past. I know there have been a lot of them, and but that's historical and going back a number of years. You want to comment on that?
Bethany, do you have a better idea than me?
Sure. I can give it a shot. So the few that we've seen recently, we had, I think, 2 that went in front of Mick Ireland last year. They were both trying to change their category. They weren't happy with their category that we placed them in, and they were asking Mick to change them to a different category. Often what we see is people leaving for extended periods of time, longer than the 12-month gap that APCHA allows, and wanting to keep their historic work history. So let's say they worked in Aspen for 5 or 6 years. They left for anywhere from, I think we've seen 2 or 3 up to, I think, a 20-year request come before us way back.
Yeah.
And for us to reinstate that previous work history so they could start bidding on units immediately. So we mainly see one tied around a work history gap in Pitkin County, and looking for a waiver of that 4-year requirement to start bidding in the top priority.
How entitled do you have to?
How
show
has
that
he
you've
ruled
20
on
years to
those?
Quite.
Did he rule in their favor, or?
So Mick ruled in one case, a family left for, I think, 24 months instead of 12 months, care of an ill family member, and he did allow them to maintain their previous work history. The prior ones, I can't speak to. I do know that someone a while ago, and Cindy can maybe give a better time, but at least 10 years ago was allowed a much larger gap than 2 or 3 years. Mick did rule that someone could have a 12-month period to come back into that category. So he did give them the lower category than APCHA staff had placed them into. I do think that had an effect from COVID more than anything else. I can't speak to whether he'd make that exception again in the future. But it's certainly, you know, what is an undue hardship? I had someone request one, a hearing the other day, and I said, you know, you just have to let us know that you do have an undue hardship. And they came back and said, you know, I guess I don't have an undue hardship. And so, you know, I think it's just it's a weird standard.
Bethany?
I just wanted to add one other piece of this that I believe happens is that people who know or who read the code and find out that they can apply for this may do that where other people who, you know, they're rule followers, they're not doing that. And so I do find it's an unequal application as well.
Would it be a correct interpretation of the outcome of this? So the intent is to standardize the rules and also to provide maybe a better incentive to update the rules where needed. So when somebody comes forward with a hardship, you know, then rather than taking it as a one-off, it would come to the board and then we can decide if that's a rule we want to change for everybody. And so the benefit to the overall system is better rule setting, but we will likely be seeing people or hearing from people who are saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do right now. There is no release valve for you, but there will be for the next person because of what we learned from you. Is that like a realistic expectation?
Or you would give us direction saying, let's look into
yeah,
that.
I can. Sorry, Cindy.
That's okay.
Cindy and I have already started talking about the idea of the most common one we see is kids who have grown up here, went to college, maybe came back, but then disappeared for 5-6 years and want us to allow them to start bidding due to the fact that they grew up here. And even though they were gone for a while and on top of college, so it wasn't just that they were gone for college, they were gone for an additional set of years, just expect us to allow them that top priority. And so something like that, certainly, Skippy, we could start looking at and saying, you know, bringing it to the board. Does the board want to acknowledge a local who has grown up here, and even though they might have gone away for college and then decided they wanted 4 or 5 years outside of the valley to come back and have that top priority bidding, certainly we could bring that forward. I think we don't see enough of these necessarily that there is going to be a significant number of rule changes. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, yes, that's what will happen, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just want to understand.
So what forum do they go to if we take away this process that Tom's got here? What do they do?
Just doesn't happen.
I mean, if
Well, it's basically, Rick, it's like we get people come in all the time who just don't qualify. I mean, that's it.
yeah, okay.
And why should they be, you know, if we're gonna bend what I think we're saying is bending the rules on a case-by-case basis is not good policy. And that
Okay.
if somebody's circumstances are egregious enough that they should be given a break, then so should everybody else. Because these circumstances tend to repeat themselves.
Agreed. I get it.
Any other questions? No.
And honestly, with the one person who said, you know, I really and truly don't have a hardship, Bethany and I started looking at it and saying, well, maybe it is something that we need to readdress and giving some type of years. So it is something that if something comes to us where we think it makes sense, at least in some form, I think we as a staff would bring it to you guys to add into the regulations or to modify the regulations because it makes sense. Right. And it's the people who just out and out don't qualify that are requesting these special reviews, and it's like, show us a hardship. Well, I really need housing. Everybody needs housing. Everybody has that hardship. And this is where we're stuck when we have one person who thinks that they're entitled over everybody else. Mm-hmm. But honestly, I think us as staff, we listen to what people's problems are. We listen to their issues and stuff. And if we really and truly believe that makes sense, just like this last one, we would try to come up with some type of a policy change and bring it to you guys anyway.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Seeing a lot of nodding heads, is there anyone who has a problem with this or would like to see an amendment?
I don't have a problem. I just, I wanted to kind of give what I think is a little bit of history, but when you think about when the APCHA program had started, the rules had not evolved to nearly as far along as they are now. And so there were always questions that were coming up, the divorce, how many kids, who rooms, who gets priority, this and that. The spouse never worked, but the husband worked, he's passed away, does she get to stay in a unit? So a lot of these questions that used to be answered by special review have been put into the guidelines. I think that that's a big part of it. And I know I'd earlier emailed Tom with questions like, well, what if somebody had a disabled child who really never worked the 1,500 hours? Maybe they could get 900 pushing carts at Clark's. Could they still have a unit? And I was thinking really very much of what happens with Social Security, and you have a child and your child is disabled, they will probably receive Social Security disability in their parent's name because the parents had worked. And is that child someone we could house in the community or would be housed? And Tom had said, no, our guidelines really don't allow for that. And that may have been a case where someone would have come in special review before with the parents, we're aging, we'd like to get them in the unit, we'll set up the money for it, they're just not gonna work as much as you want, So that's like the only real circumstance of this really type of unusual thing that I could see potentially wanting a special review hearing. And we don't have provisions for something like that, but it's rare. It's very minimal. But again, I'm just saying special review was there because all sorts of life circumstances would come up that this board had never dealt with before or figured out guidelines about. But time to let it go. I'll let it go.
See, I'm a big proponent of review by your peers at some point, right? I don't know if you just tell people no, they go through the process. I think there's value in this process, but we've spelt out quite a bit in the guidelines over the years, but I still think there's that one-off that makes sense that you're going to wish that if you go to the black and white process, that you're going to wish that would have made sense, or you would have thought, well, that makes a lot of sense. But you can't
Well,
do it
and
because the
again, it
rules
is
say no.
something that if somebody brings it up, it is something that we can still bring to the board, as this is something that we think needs to be addressed in our regulations, and that we can add, if you're okay, put some type of mechanism in the guidelines or in the regulations to address something that is that one-off, that to us is really important as well. Because not only can they can come under, if they say, well, we're not gonna even listen to it, which we've never done. We've always listened to somebody say, well, this is really what it is. If you think it's important enough, you can go to the board. And we always tell them they can come to the board under public comment. And then if it's something that you guys feel that really needs to be addressed, then you would give direction to staff as well to look at that as a regulation change.
It's kind of like the development community and individual landowners will come to the city and say, we'd like to propose a code change. And that we'd like to do this, almost like we were just hearing earlier at the beginning of the meeting. Does your code allow it if you change the code here? And then the board will say, yes, we'd like ComDev to take a look at the pros and cons of that and we'll consider it. Or no, we can't because we already know what the precedent is, or it's an unreasonable request. But, we can, and maybe that should be footnoted in the guidelines somewhere, that, potential changes of guidelines can be presented to the board at public comment, or talk to staff or something, but.
I do agree with Cindy, right? I've had the experience of being with Cindy and Bethany, and they're recommending to people that they talk to the board or that they bring it to certain people. And remember that administrative discretion exists, right? In any set of regulations there is administrative discretion. So for example, yes, we have the regulations, and during COVID, the 1,500 hours was suspended, right? And there was very clear communication around, talk to us, right? And so I think Cindy's, and the other piece is, right, this is a small and nimble organization, and I've seen them bring things to the board and regulations, and there's stuff coming up on the long-term agenda that is specifically addressing some things that people in the community have brought that you look at and say, wow, that makes sense, and the board should take a look at that. And I have never seen anyone ever try to stonewall someone or not let them go. And I do think in a community like this, right, there are enough outlets that people call the city council, they call the mayor, they call the APCHA board. So I'm actually not concerned about those things not happening, and definitely more concerned about unequal treatment under the regulations by people who know about them versus don't know about this special review. And I've seen it happen, and I appreciate Rachel's history because I've seen it happen on a county council where they created a special review for any regulation you wanted in the entire county. You could request a special review, and all it ended up being was an end run.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to assure you, John, that this organization has a heart, and it really it deals with those everyday sensitive issues of people and trying to get housing, and really this organization works hard at housing people.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Kelly, do you have anything you wanted to add on this guy? Nope.
I mean, I think back to the appeals that we've seen. How many did we overturn? How
Really?
many?
None.
Right?
Yeah.
So maybe there isn't a
Yeah.
real reasonable need for it, so.
David, anything you wanted to add on this guy? Okay, so that's
So we'll push this one forward.
This one will push forward.
Okay.
All right. Transfers outside the bid process.
Okay, Betty, can you back up a page? Skippy, do you mind if we go in order of the packet? Is that okay, which is
Am I out of order?
bid submission?
Just bid submission.
Yeah,
Bid
sorry.
submissions
I'm
first, yeah.
Sorry about that.
I think it's page 33 of the packet. So we're, as Skippy said, there's two more regulation changes, and we'll see if we get to them. If not, we'll stop at 7 o'clock. But the first one that we're recommending is allowing applicants to only bid, one category up. So a category 2 household currently can bid on category 2, 3, and 4. And we're proposing that a household that's category 2 could only bid on category 2 and category 3.
What if
there's,
sorry, I should have let you finish, I apologize.
No, go ahead, ask your question.
Well, my thought was, what if there are no other qualified bidders?
Seems unlikely.
Well, it does.
Never seen, I've never
I'm
seen
just saying,
that.
you're limiting a buyer pool to a seller. Let's say you're a category 3 seller and you got category 1 bidder,
It's a legitimate
and nobody
question.
else bids, and a category 1 bidder still standing.
Yeah.
Do we stop the sale at that point?
Yeah.
That's
a
a
legitimate
They wouldn't
question.
even be able to
Put their
put,
name in, they wouldn't be
they
able to
wouldn't
put
even
their name in.
be able to even put their name in if they're category 1.
Yeah, they wouldn't, under the proposal, they wouldn't be able to put their name in to the pot. And I think what we would do at that point is what we do for other lotteries is if there are no interested parties and we've gone through the list, which has occasionally happened out at Woody Creek, we reopen it back up. And so we could look at then reopening it back up to a category 1 household in that case. I don't anticipate that happening. Certainly if there's another economic downturn, it could happen, but I don't anticipate it happening. I think there's a few reasons certainly for this. One's an affordability piece. The category 1 household max sales price is a little bit different than categories 4, certainly 3. It's also going to have an effect of reducing the number, hypothetically, of bidders in a category 4 lottery. Right now, for a category 4 lottery, you have 1, 2, 3 and 4 applicants that might have put their name in. If this were forward, it would be only 3 and 4. Category 3 and 4 applicants that would be able to put their name in for that lottery. We do think this makes sense. I know Cindy mentioned an affordability standard earlier this evening that we don't have in place yet, but on top of the affordability piece, I know another piece that we've been discussing with the board and we're hoping to bring to you all in later this year is relooking at lottery chances and what that piece looks like. But I do think this is a step in the right direction. We hear from a number of Category 4 households that have entered lotteries, and a Category 1 winner came up first. And so certainly it, I don't want to say levels the playing field, but provides a little more equity to that Category 4 household that can't bid on a Category 1, 2, or 3, is only able to bid on that Category 4 unit.
Yeah.
Happy to answer any questions or provide any further guidance. I can only speak to Kelly.
Oh, yeah, Rachel's gonna go, then Carson, and Kelly may raise her hand.
Yeah, I support this. You know, yeah, some people are gonna feel very limited by it, who may have had a lot of cash to put down and low income or other assets. But I think it's really the wise thing to do. And when we talked about condos, which are gonna need their own work session, what I was gonna comment there is that HOAs are very subjective. You know, it's not as if it's you know, how much is the manager being paid versus not being paid? How many volunteers are in the group? You know, how much are they decorating the office versus, you know, taking care of the grounds? It gets really hard to measure how well each HOA is actually doing with the repairs and the management responsibilities they have. And so you could buy into a Category 4 and end up with very large HOA dues that are more than your mortgage. And places like Hunter Creek, I think Cindy said people are kind of bailing in droves when they can because the HOAs have gotten so big because of all the deferred maintenance. So again, I think somebody could get in, and I might be an example of that, where it's really very hard now to keep up. It was not so hard on the commissioner's salary, and thank God I'm married now, it's helping, but you know, but I'm just saying, I think it is for individuals' own financial security, and should they then have a good run and be able to bid on a Category 4 and qualify for a 4, so be it. That's good that they were able to move up the ladder. But I will support this, because the cost of your mortgage is not the only cost of the unit, and that's the one thing we really have to emphasize. You know, you're paying a whole nother % a year, or you should be, for upkeep and other items, and the HOAs are really the linchpin for most of this.
Other questions?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the only issue I have with this is something we kind of hit on earlier, is that you can have neighboring properties in the same building that are, you know, wildly different in price, and so, you know, that would be my only thought is, I mean, yes, you may be excluding someone, but if it could be a property that they could afford, and so I guess what I'm thinking is if you had somebody who's in a Category 2 and then you know, renting, but they sort of have a positive outlook on their income, they think, you know, maybe I'm going to be a 3 or 4, those people would, I mean, they would only be able to bid on 3, and so I guess I don't know.
It is limiting.
It is, yeah.
It is, but again, I really can only come back to are people getting into what they know they're going to get into. And, you know, when you're a lower category income and you get on the HOA board of a Category 4 or 5, you're not going to want to have those special assessments, and you're not going to want to raise the dues. And that is literally what happened at Hunter Creek. We had a lot of people there who said people can't afford another $10 a month. I heard that publicly said. And so they just let the debts keep growing up. So I think you also get into a financial situation differently, right, where they're not going to want to support a larger HOA investments in their units.
That's a good point.
Kelly, I see your hand up. I just want to comment on you, because I had the same observation, which I think the intent of what we're doing here is the correct one, to make sure that people's ability to pay is matched with their housing, and that the categories that we are creating are housing those they're intended to house, right? So that we have the diversity of our thing. There are these, they're not even really edge cases, they're quite frequent, where some units are priced really, really low. So I'm a category 3, and sometimes there's category 4 units that are priced below the category 3 unit, right? And so this is only a first turn problem if we pass the standards for sellers, right? I recognize that, but the first turn's 1,500 units, so it's not insignificant. So I was just wondering if the way to do it would be to say, yes, it's one category up bid, but for the first turn, rather than just the category, we look at like what would be the max sale of the category above. So if I'm category 3 and the category 4 unit at max sale is 300,000, I can bid on any unit up to 300,000 as opposed to just 4, just in case some have that differential value. Does that make
That's
sense?
going to be, just to let you know, that's going to be a nightmare for us to try to
I like
figure out.
Cindy
And the only reason
Yeah.
those are lower price units is because they have a
And
lot
they're
of
older
deferred
units,
maintenance.
and they
and we
need
just
more
talked
money
Do
to
not
be
have
put
the same
into
amenity
them.
levels.
Yeah.
Modern 2-bedrooms have 2 bathrooms.
Yeah.
Older ones don't. Modern kitchens, there's just a big amenity level difference between the newer
Yeah,
price
that's
units
fair.
and the old ones.
And honestly, the complaints
That makes sense.
that we get from category 4 people, that they can only bid on category 4 or category 5, and they have to compete with category 1, 2s, and 3s.
Sure.
It's
Not
getting
fair.
harder and harder.
It's not
It's getting harder and harder for them to win, because for some reason the lower category people seem to win. This is our attempt to make it more fair
Well,
for
they
those
seem to win
higher,
because there's
higher
3
ones.
buckets of those categories and 1 bucket of the other, so they have 3 times the chance.
Yeah.
Well, and I think Rachel's point is well made, and we just talked earlier about trying to increase the prices of those lower.
Right,
those
no,
lower
you're right, yeah,
units,
yeah.
so.
All right,
Nice
Kelly.
try.
Kelly?
I don't have anything to add.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so it sounds like general support here.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, this one can move forward as well. So my packet seems to be,
No.
No, I think you're in the right order.
Maddie, if you jump to page 34, I think Maddie's controlling the screen. If not, I apologize. Whoever's
Yeah, she
controlling
is.
the screen.
and now we're gonna do
Thank you.
transfers?
So,
Page 30.
except we're gonna take a slight 34,
The
Maddie.
next one.
There we go.
Nope.
34?
This
You're on.
describes
Yeah.
me.
There you go.
So, correct, perfect, thank you. We took from feedback from, I think, 2 meetings ago, was the idea that, death of a, which is a sad topic I hate talking about, but death of a qualified employee in both a rental and an ownership unit should better align with the transfer outside the bid process. I think some of what we talked about is whether it was planned to transfer it or unplanned. We wanted to put those in alignment. And so what we've done, Maddie, is if you scroll down just slightly to the second half of the page, we didn't really change rental, but what we did is we really looked at ownership. And Maddie, if you jump down, I guess I apologize, to the start of page 35. What we're proposing is the idea that if a owner passes away and there is a child, not a dependent child, but a child that would like to take ownership of that unit, we are proposing that they follow the similar rules for transfers outside the bid process. So their assets and income must be at or below the requirements for a Category 5 unit.
Right.
The minimum occupancy requirement -1 needs to be met. We have added a caveat in here, though, based upon what we thought was board feedback, that minimum occupancy could be waived if that child has a 10-year consecutive work history in Pitkin County prior to their parents' death. And if there's not that 10-year work history, then they have to meet occupancy -1. And we are requiring a 4-year work history in Pitkin County prior to the owner's death, or that they can document that they're in a graduate program, college, or something like that. So that's one piece that we've added in, which was not brought to you before. We wanted to align it, as I said, with transfers outside the bid process. I'm happy to answer any questions on that piece, or we can tackle the next piece and then answer questions all at once.
Let's do questions first. Does anyone have any clarification on any of that?
Well,
on just this part B here.
Okay, go on. Nope, I'm on C already.
You're on C already. Okay, let's go to C then.
Great. To provide some tweaks to this before we bring this back. And Cindy, my internet connection just said it's unstable, so please help me out if I lose. And I'll turn my camera off to try to preserve some of that, so I apologize. But the idea is that we certainly want to address the ownership, because a dependent minor can't be the owner of a deed-restricted unit, or any unit really. And so we will address that piece and then include that when we bring it back. But this provision is in place in case a child is in school and their parents pass away, and it allows them to continue their schooling in the Aspen School District.
Questions on C?
Well, we put a caveat in here: a higher education program is not allowed to exceed 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So let's use the example of my kid goes to college. By the grace of God or something, he actually gets serious about education instead of football and decides he wants to be a doctor, right? And my wife and I die 2 years from now in a fiery plane crash somewhere. That's probably a bad use, but
That is a very bad example.
sorry, never mind. Car crash. He's 2 years into undergrad. He finishes his undergrad. He gets accepted to the really low rent medical school. Has 4 years of medical school. Has 4 more years of residency. But he has every intent of coming back to Aspen. Would be a community benefit probably to have a doctor housing figured out, or whatever he is. Why would we limit it to just a 4-year program?
John, I think that's a fair comment, and it's one Cindy and I have been batting around in the office, and so we are open to any changes. This is currently what's in the regulations, is that 4-year. But I certainly can acknowledge the fact that it might take 5 years is more standard these days, and certainly if we want to account for grad school, happy to put that in.
This is Rachel. I tend to agree with John on that, but the one thing I was wondering, regardless of that change, is should they be required to rent it while they're gone? I mean, this is effectively a leave of absence.
Yep.
And, I suppose if it's a 1-bedroom and they're in Denver, they might come up on weekends or something, but if it's a 2-bedroom, at least one of the 2 rooms would have to be rented. And this is effectively a leave of absence. So I think we might want to reference that the leave of absence provisions kick in, which again, I believe require rental of the unit while you're gone.
It depends. Not all leave of absences require, if somebody's gone for a year, they can opt not to rent it out.
Okay.
But we very rarely see that.
Well, this is 4
But this
years
is a lot
and
different.
potentially 8. It seems that that's something we should at least discuss.
I would say instead of the 4 years, what if we just said full-time in a higher education
program.
right? If you're full-time,
As long as they're renting it.
as long as you're renting it and
Yeah.
you're full-time enrolled.
Mm-hmm. I'm comfortable with that.
I'm semi-comfortable with it. I can just imagine someone having a tough semester and them not taking a full load that semester. And I'd hate to have that be what kicks them back out. That's the only thing. Maybe if we're a little
Right.
loose on what full-time means,
Right.
then that's fine.
Right.
I just don't want someone taking 2 credits a year for 20
Right.
years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
so
Exactly.
we just have to know the parameters around it, but I don't want to kick someone out over a bad semester.
Agreed.
Kelly, I'm getting better at this.
Well, I guess I just wonder, I mean, I'm thinking of this sort of in terms of how does this compare to the experience of other college students? You know, we're having a separate discussion, right, which came up a while ago about whether parents should be able to count their college-age kids up to a certain number of times for occupancy purposes or not. And, you know, well, number one, I have the question for myself, is this an equitable comparison to sort of say, okay, a college kid who's living in a parent's house who continues to, you know, who continue to be alive and maybe want to buy a different unit, they don't seem to count, but someone else who inherited this unit has kind of a different set of rules that they have to abide by, even though kind of the experience that they're living is potentially identical. So I just want to pose the question to the board, you know, should we be thinking of these in a similar way, or, you know, are there enough varying factors where they can be treated differently here?
Was the age 24 somehow related to that last question?
And that's one of the things that we
It was a bit of a cutoff, and so maybe
yeah,
that's
we were
another way of
recommending
looking
changing
at
from 24 down to 19 in order to qualify that child, the dependent, to purchase a new, bigger home.
Right.
Is what we were, and it wasn't if somebody's already in it. It's to if they want to now they're in a. We even have some people in a 3-bedroom want to move to a different 3-bedroom, and their kids under 24. But they're still classified as a dependent. And we get very angry emails from families who have young kids in situations like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, is it the same as this? And I think that's up to you guys to decide on whether it really is the same as this. When a parent dies, they grew up in that home. Is it really the same as, well, now we want to buy this other home? I see it differently, but you guys might see it that, no, it should be the same.
I see it differently.
Feels quite
That
different
makes
to me.
sense.
I see it
That may not have made sense. I'm tired, but
It seems quite different to me. Yeah. The
The difference though is there a room in this community for that child? You know, whether or not their parents have died or their parents are still alive. Because if we're going to decide the cutoff date is 19, and they try to move from a 3-bedroom to a 3-bedroom, and now that child is 20, now they're going to move from a 3-bedroom to a 2-bedroom, you know, so no, there's not a room for that child who's away at college because of their age, whereas, you know, this other person who's sort of inherited this unit isn't going to run into the same complication. And again, I just, you know, it's okay if it's not similarly enough, but to those individual people, it might feel similarly enough.
My question is what we talked about before, where that Rachel brought up, where if a parent, you know, does die, but it's a 4-bedroom home and there's one kid, rather than having them inherit the 4-bedroom home, is there a solution where they have access to a size appropriate unit instead? And I'm wondering if that has been further developed or how that fits in here.
I heard there were some real challenges with people feeling they would be bumped out of priority for those 1 or 2-bedroom units where there is currently the highest demand of someone who had another house. So I don't think there's been any further drilling down deeper on that concept at this time.
Yeah, and I understand why anyone, well, hey, I'm in that boat, right? I'm one of those people, but if my opportunity to win a lottery pushes back 1 bedroom to free up 3 more for the system, I would be quite selfish in not being okay with that. And so I personally
there's a lot of
be.
people who've been bidding for 25 years that would not feel that they're selfish for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they
So
may
I don't-
feel,
I
they may
disagree
feel
with you
that
on
way,
that,
but the net to the community is 2 bedrooms. So the reality
extra
is the
bedrooms.
opposite,
Yeah.
no matter how they
Well,
feel.
who's not to say these 2 bedrooms wouldn't be occupied by
Well, so that's what I'm asking.
tenants or renters? I mean, doesn't the rental of the, you know, like we talked about, somebody working on a college degree or whatever it is, the forced rental or the required rental of that unit in the period your absence, put a family in a house, because you're gonna qualify the family, right? They're gonna have to go through the same process anybody else is when they go to rent.
Well, so that's what I'm asking, because we initially talked about that, and we were kind of
Yeah.
like,
But-
maybe
but-
not.
But we're now jumping to a different topic than the one we're discussing.
Yeah.
And that would not be good for the last 20 minutes of the meeting.
Okay, so I need to understand how these two topics then separate, or if that's happening separately, because that's something, I don't know if I have an old packet or whatever, but this bit was not in mine, so I'm playing catch up on this paragraph right now, and I was reading it as though we were circling back to that discussion. So are we not circling back to that discussion?
So paragraph C is exactly how the current regulations lie right now.
Okay.
No changes have been proposed to this amendment. We can certainly make them in the future, but staff was not recommending any changes to this. I'm happy to add a different provision regarding the schooling, but this is not something that staff was recommending making any changes to. It's merely in here as proposed so that you can see the entire body of how this section would read, and I apologize for not clarifying that.
Got it.
Addition was the part we just covered, that if there was an unexpected death, let's say of an owner, and they hadn't gotten around to transferring the unit to their child who's living in Pitkin County, how can we make that transfer still happen? Because under current regulations, that transfer cannot happen. That unit has to go back into the lottery, and there is no path to transfer to a family member.
Understood.
So we
Okay.
line it from that.
I'm sorry,
perspective.
I misunderstood. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, and I appreciate John's amendment. So that makes sense.
Well,
So-
into
so-
that amendment, maybe,
Perfect. So,
sorry.
no, John, tell me what
Well, I was gonna
or
say,
what the
in
board would
that
like.
amendment, just to clarify, maybe not full-time enrollment, but reasonable, reasonable gets used in legal all the time, so it gets negotiated and discussed, but reasonable progress on a degree or career track, something, and you guys can
Yeah.
hash that out,
Consistent,
but.
they're, ongoing.
Great.
Timely.
We can do that and bring it back if that's where the board votes on, or
Took my husband
degrees
20
on.
years
doing
to
this work. So,
graduate.
in the next
With
18
various
minutes, if Skippy's
degrees.
amenable, I'll try to get through the next piece.
Yep.
Okay, so Maddie, if you can scroll down. So we're going to the bottom of page 20, or 36, excuse me. So the few things, and I apologize if you can hear my kids in the background, but what we tried to do is based upon the feedback. If Maddie scrolls down, we cleaned this section up a ton. We had Tom look at it. We had some other folks look at it. We tried to take all the feedback and make it very clear that in one section, it's the addition of an owner. So the current owner is staying on, and then a spouse, child, or sibling might be added. And what we're doing there is that, if a spouse is added, they don't need to meet asset limits. They don't need to meet income limits of that category. They solely need to not own other property in the ownership exclusion zone and be an employee of within Pitkin County, and meeting that requirement. If a child is added, that child must meet all the requirements of the applicable deed restriction and APCHA regulations. So that child needs to be below or at a Category 5, and meet anything. They don't need to meet occupancy, and I apologize if it says they do, because the owner has already met that occupancy. So when they add that, it doesn't need to meet occupancy. So that's one section. If it moves to a sibling, they need to meet occupancy, qualify under the unit's category, demonstrate a work history of 4 years in Pitkin County. So that's staying very similar to current process. The transfer is going to require a $1,000 fee. Currently, it's a $100 fee, which we've for years felt has been very small. based on the amount of work that's done internally on that transfer. And in a normal transfer, APCHA receives a 2% sales fee, and we're not requesting that. We're just saying $1,000. And a new deed restriction must be placed on the property. So that's half of it. And then the second piece is to add on, to remove the original owner and add on a new owner. And that's where we're suggesting that minimum occupancy be met -1, but it can be waived if there's a 10-year work history. And so all of those pieces would align with the death of a qualified owner from prior that we were talking about. Both provisions match equally. So I'm happy to give any more explanation or answer any questions. I think we tried to take all of your feedback and put it into play.
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. And for anyone who's watching for the first time in the public, we have seen this before. We've talked about it, so I know it's a lot going quickly, but if it moves forward, we will see this again as well in more detail for first and second reading, so there'll be ample time to dig into the details. Do we have questions?
Yeah, it's just kind of semantics here, Bethany, but in section 2A, and then all the bullet points, the third bullet point from the bottom in section A, all such persons must meet the requirements. And I'm just not sure all such persons is really clear, because it talks about so many other types of people in the paragraph ahead. The individual to be the joint tenant, the spouse, the sibling, the child. I just think we should repeat who we're talking about rather than just say all such persons for clarity.
I can make that
Aforementioned.
change.
Yeah, it's small, but it's just too vague for me.
Any other questions or landmines that we see before this comes back for a more rigorous first reading?
Well, thank you for the clarifications. It really reads a lot cleaner than the prior sections.
All right. Well, it looks like that can move forward as well, which is a full agenda and a lot of good work, guys. Thank you to everyone who's helped put this on in the hybrid mode as well. We'll close that section of the hearing and move to the last, which is optional board member comments. So anyone have anything that they would like to add?
I just want to say how much I've enjoyed in-person meetings. I find it a lot more interactive, and we can pipe up without having to stand there with our hand and forget what we were going to talk about. So I'm thankful that we're back in person.
Yeah, right on.
Because these are complex topics, and it's hard to really get the flow over that.
I
agree.
talked a lot more.
Yes, you do. Have that little voice from the past.
Anybody else?
Well, I agree. I think the in-person meetings stimulate more discussion too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I apologize for stepping on people's toes when I interrupt, so I'm not raising my hand.
Well, we're all relearning.
I have no manners, ask my wife.
No, thank you. I just want to compliment staff on their work on this. You're really doing a good job of pulling it apart in understandable ways and meaningful bites. So thank you. Cindy, everybody. Bethany.
Kelly, nothing? Cool. Just really quickly for everyone here, mostly public as well, just a couple quick things. You probably noticed on the agenda, the long-term agenda is back. I know that some of you have said, like, why do we need to put things out so long? They're going to change. This feels silly. And the reason we're doing that is to try and tell the story of where we're going. We have these conversations over and over how we're chasing the tail of the press and just responding to negative stuff. this is how we really, for the community, show these are the big things we're gonna take on and
Our feet to the fire.
demonstrate the positive vision, give the press something to talk about that keeps us out of that reactionary phase. So do we expect it to change? Yes. Will things get pushed back? Yes. But this is the roadmap for the community, so that's why it's back in there. Second thing is staff now has moved into their new office for the most part. We're talking about doing like a barbecue, a meet and greet, a tour of the office. So there's not a date yet, but you guys can
There
look
is a
forward.
date.
There is a date.
There's a date. We
It's,
said
it's our first
last
meeting
week.
in August.
Oh,
Instead
shit,
of
we
having a
did say
meeting
that.
in August, we're gonna have a barbecue out at Truscott.
Will that start at 4 too?
Yes.
Are we gonna get any work done?
No.
No, so
No,
it was
it's strictly a meet and greet.
Okay, I just want to
and look at
know
the offices
what we
and
were
that's
doing.
And the
it.
board has traditionally taken a week off in August.
Yeah, so we're
Okay.
filling
Why we
in
put it
the
there.
off week. So,
Terrific.
so that's upcoming. And then the last thing is just a request of each of you. You know, we're through Standards for Sellers was kind of the first sausage making factory that we've done here. We've got more coming. Right sizing is coming. There's some other big picture stuff. So in terms of just process, how did the discussion go? It will be a little different now that we're not on Zoom. But any observations you had, things that we can do differently in how we structure conversations, the meeting, the sequence, the process, please reach out. Let's talk about it because I really want to dial that stuff in and just continually to improve it as we go.
Yeah.
That's it.
You know, for me, it's always just, how will this play out? You know, it's kind of either a narrative or storytelling, or, you know, how will this play out in 3 different examples? You know, things like that help me to understand why something's being proposed.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, you're not gonna believe this, but I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Shocking.
Second.
What are we gonna do when you're gone, Rick? We'll be stuck here all night.
We still have to do a roll call vote because we're
Okay.
not all in person.
We'll all go to Kelly first.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Rachel,
Yes, thank you.
John,
Yes.
Carson,
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
That's
Thank
fabulous.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
On to mantras. 2 days of Club 20 policy.
We're putting those wolves in Boulder too, right? My uncle deals with wolves in Montana on his ranch. He's got a huge ranch in western Montana, and they've been around there 10 years now.
I'm gonna not have this.
I don't think they're endangered anymore.
I
They-
hate having this thing open.
Probably not in some states.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that.